Hi, everybody. This is Radio Free Mormon. Welcome to the show. Once again, we're going to be continuing with our analysis, dissection, and even vivisection of the Austin Fife Light on Truth letter. We're up to chapter 17, which is appropriately titled Other. It may be the worst chapter in the history of bad chapters. I know I said that about the last chapter, but Austin has the singular facility of being able to excel his badness with each chapter in his book. And when I say we, yes, I mean me and Kolby Reddish, co-counsel. How are you doing?
Good morning, RFM. I'm doing well. How are you?
I'm doing great. You look like you've got some new flannel on.
This is actually old flannel, but you know, we do what we can here.
Well, the funny thing is, it looks just like the new flannel. That's the great thing about flannel.
That's the great thing about flannel.
It could be from the colors. I'm thinking maybe 70s.
Yeah, sure.
I think John Travolta wore that flannel shirt in Saturday Night Fever.
I think it's a Costco special.
Well, good. Okay, so I like the color scheme, though. I really do. Those are my colors, like the warmer colors, the oranges and the reds. That's what appeals to me.
'Tis the season, after all.
Yes, it is. Well, what are you doing here? Is this a coincidence, or how have we met yet again to talk about Austin Fife? We're almost done with this book, aren't you? What did you think of this chapter?
I'm doing well, aside from the fact that, yes, I can't. When you said chapter 17, I did a double take because I can't believe we've done this round the horn so many times.
Austin can't believe it either.
Yeah, Austin
can't put more work into his book than he did.
He did accuse us of harassing him on Twitter, by the way, which I think is funny. Generally, harassment requires actually contacting the person. But
serial book reviews.
Yeah.
Serial book critiques, that qualifies as harassment nowadays. Maybe he'll file for a protection order.
Oh, that'd be fantastic. I've never met someone that was so upset that a work they put out into the world has been read and taken seriously. It's pretty hilarious. But no, this chapter is terrible. I was really busy this week, had a busy week at work, so I didn't get to the slides until last night. And as I was going over the slides, listening to you guys eviscerate Jonah Barnes, Cammie and I were doing it together and sitting there just laughing at how bad this chapter is.
This chapter in the book, right? I was back on Jonah Barnes from last night. Eviscerate is a good word. Emasculate would be the wrong word with Jonah, because you have to have balls first before you can emasculate somebody. Okay, well, I tell you what, we'll lay off Jonah for now, and we'll focus on Austin, okay?
Yeah.
Here is the title page. Now, I titled this on the thumbnail, Mormonism has just crossed over into the Twilight Zone. Mm-hmm. But we're talking about Austin Fife, and specifically his Light on Truth letter, and specifically this chapter in the Light on Truth letter titled Other. Austin Fife has just crossed over into the Twilight Zone. So it's chapter 17. Now, I trust I don't have to explain to many people out there what the heck the Twilight Zone is. It has its own ride named after it, for crying out loud. That's ensuring it will never be forgotten. But back in, was it 4 years or so, back in the late 50s, early 60s, Rod Serling introduced and had this crazy show on called The Twilight Zone. And it's entered into the lexicon. But every year, every season, he would tinker with the introduction that he would do over the opening credits. And this is, I think, from the last one. This is the most extensive one. So if you'll pardon me while I read this for a second, I think it's appropriate that we read this introduction to the Twilight Zone, because that's where we're heading in chapter 17, titled Other, in the Light on Truth letter. There is a fifth dimension beyond that which is known to man. It is a dimension as vast as space and as timeless as infinity. Hang on a second here. I got to get my cigarette. You remember the sea sticks that killed poor Rod? It is a middle ground between light and shadow, between science and superstition. And it lies between the pit of man's fears and the summit of his knowledge. This is the dimension of imagination. It is an area which we call the Light on Truth letter. Through that curve there at the end, were you expecting that one?
I wasn't, but the whole thing cracked me up. Good impression.
Thank you. I lost it on the second to last line, but that's okay, because I was thinking about what I was going to do with the very last line. So here is the actual letter. Once again, this is the chapter titled Other, because all the other good chapter titles were taken. Miscellaneous. Even if you just say miscellaneous, it means the same thing, but you sound smarter.
I was
That's
going to
just a
say
note for a future edition. What?
it could have been labeled like junk drawer, but I think really that's the book and where the book belongs. So
I am going to have to ask you as we go along for you to think about the question of why it is that he decided to make a chapter like this.
yeah, I
Okay.
have no idea. In fact, little behind the scenes stuff. I had forgotten this was even a chapter. I was planning on doing a
Oh,
different
right.
chapter. And so we have prophets and ongoing restoration, general belief in God, kind of general theism stuff, and then the conclusion left after this one. So why he would make a chapter called Other is beyond me. I don't know.
Well,
What do
this
you
stuff
think?
just didn't fit into any of his other chapters, but it was too good to leave out of the book. Apparently, I mean, that's what I'm left to presume was his feeling about it. He starts with a couple of quotes. First from Bill Maher. He says, by any standard, Mormonism is more ridiculous than any other religion. Now, I certainly don't think that's true. And I think Bill Maher is just saying it for effect. I once decided, this was toward the end of my apologetic phase,
Mm-hmm.
where it started to occur to me that while I'm, debating and arguing with other Christians from other denominations, mostly Baptist and Disciple of Christ,
Mm-hmm.
since I'm in Texas. But it did occur to me at one point with particular force that the belief that united us as Christians was about Jesus and the crucifixion and the resurrection. And then I thought, if we can agree that a dead man came back to life, everything else is really just details.
Absolutely. I completely believe that. I would change Bill Maher's statement to say Mormonism is no more ridiculous than any other religion because once you accept that people can return back from the dead or heal people's eyes by spitting on some mud or talking snakes or talking donkeys, there are so many different things just inherent to Christianity that are I don't want to say ridiculous in the sense it's like immediately discounting, but they are ridiculous, miraculous claims to believe literally happened. All of them. Mormonism has more of them. I've heard Sam Harris express a similar sentiment before, and the way he's expressed it is he's said like Mormonism is inherently more ridiculous than Christianity because the belief that Jesus will return and reign apocalyptically is a specific belief associated with Christianity, but the belief that Jesus Christ will return and reign apocalyptically in Jackson County, Missouri, is unique to Mormonism and is a more specific claim. So it's inherently going to be less likely that he'll return specifically to Jackson County, Missouri, than just that he'll return at all. So that's the way Sam Harris expressed a similar sentiment. But
Well, it's got to return somewhere. And just
Mm.
because Mormonism happens to know the answer to all these questions that other Christians don't know the answer to, don't hate us, Sam.
That's
You
right,
want to
Sam.
read the second? I'm sorry. Go ahead. Go ahead.
Don't hate the players, hate the game, Sam. That's right.
Yeah. You want to read the second quote?
Sure. I finally had to admit it wasn't a good church, much less a true one.
So that's a user on wasmormon.org. Now, I've never been there to my knowledge to post comments, but I mean, I've said that. I discovered that 15 or 20 years ago
Mm-hmm.
when I finally realized the church, not only is it not true, it's not even good.
Mm-hmm.
I'd been limping along on good for a long time after I realized true was no longer on the table.
I think I was very much the same way, RFM. I had the unique kind of experience the last couple nights of Cammie and I went back and listened to our original Mormon Stories interview from 2022.
Mhm.
And I haven't listened to it for about 2 years. And it was surprising to me to have kind of that time capsule where I was recognizing folks who remember what catalyzed my faith crisis was basically dealing with the church's sex abuse policies firsthand in our ward. And that realization really made the transition pretty easy for me because I already knew it was pretty ridiculous to believe the claims of the church. So I was relying on good also.
Yeah. It's very sad. It's a long, disappointing process, at least for me. It's longer for some than for others, and some it's forever. Oh, here's a slide that you had put in.
It
Colby, can you
is.
take us through this?
Yeah, let me go ahead and read through this just really briefly. As I was doing an overview of the chapter, looking at the entire chapter, I was surprised to learn there is not a single substantive non-fallacious argument in this chapter. There's so many things as we're going through it that I'm just going to ask like what is the A to B connection here, because it's just like a collection of a bunch of random. When I said junk drawer, the reason I said junk drawer is because that's how it feels, or potpourri, or miscellaneous. There's just a bunch of disparate thoughts that don't even really connect. And that's saying something, because at least the rest of the book, we've been able to see the connections, even if we disagree with them for the most part. But this one's crazy. So there are a couple of true statements, but none are actually argued in a logically valued way. And thus, none do the work the chapter actually needs them to do. And then, kind of my overview here is, an argument requires clear premises. And when I say an argument requires, I don't necessarily mean that like we're expecting people to say premise one, premise two, conclusion, and do it all in syllogistic form. But the bottom line is, this is the way that thinking works. This is the way rationality works. You, when you're making claims, should have clear premises that then lead to a stated or implied conclusion and the logical connection between those two. There's none of that present here. Instead, this chapter relies on these real common to people who've listened to the rest of these series, these really stupid rhetorical questions, motive attribution, where Austin is really engaging in repeated attempts to straw man positions he clearly doesn't understand, anecdotes, broad generalizations, one of his manipulation tactics and logical fallacies, by the way, and then claims, immunizing claims, or claims that are basically what I've kind of thought in my mind are pre-apologetics, like explaining why there's what seems like a problem isn't really a problem, as long as you stay within that closed loop system.
Very good. Now, a rhetorical question, which you have as number one.
Mm-hmm.
My understanding of a rhetorical question is that it is a question that is not designed to elicit an answer. It's designed to make a point, because the question which it evokes
Mm-hmm.
is so obvious as to not need to be said. Is that a rhetorical question?
Yeah, that's the way I understand it.
Okay. I'm not sure that all of those work for him, but we'll see as we go through, and you can make up your own mind. Now, his next section in this chapter is called Group Dynamics. This doesn't look really propitious to proving Mormonism true. Group dynamics, or false for that matter.
Mm-hmm.
After years, he says, after years, remember that brief 2-week span in which he was questioning the existence of God? That happened about a decade ago. Yeah, that one.
It's so
now he says, after
interesting.
years of interacting with skeptics. When has he interacted with skeptics? I'm skeptical of that claim. He hasn't interacted with us.
Well, the other thing I'm kind of blown away by is just how much, and as we've done this series, we've made comments about this faith crisis and stuff, and I absolutely believe Austin had some type of experience. But the bottom line is, if you take what Austin claims he is at various points in this book, at some points he claims he was an atheist, at other parts he claims he was listening to church critics, at other parts he claims he was a skeptic. Now he's claiming in this chapter, after years of interacting with skeptics, this is what I think about critics. It's just so weird, and puts people who are responding to a book like this in such a weird space, because it's not like we're trying to question the legitimacy of something he experienced. We're questioning the way it's been described in this book, because it's been so inconsistent. So it's not saying, hey, we don't believe that you had some type of experience. It's just, I don't know how to make sense of all the crazy disparate claims about the way he's described this experience in this book.
Yeah, and all these weird claims that you make about the same experience you claim to have had makes me wonder whether you actually had it at all. This is Joseph Smith's first vision all over again.
Right.
Where we say, well, he probably had some kind of experience, but geez, he really went crazy with it over the years as far as elaborating and exaggerating upon that experience.
Right.
All right, so he says, after years of interacting with skeptics, we'll bracket that with a question mark, I conclude that for critics, he's going to tell us what we think. He knows because he's interacted with us for years. Oh, my Lord. That's why he has to lie and say he's interacted with us for years, because now he's going to tell us what we think. Got it. I conclude that for critics, the actual sin of the Church of Jesus Christ of Latter-day Saints is that we dare to group ourselves together, period. Kolby?
Yeah. No.
How do you respond to this kind of nonsense?
I've used this phrase before, but this entire chapter is fractally wrong, meaning that it's so wrong, it's difficult to know what to even do with it. No, Austin, the people who have issues with the Church of Jesus Christ of Latter-day Saints, their prime issue is not that the church groups itself together or that members group themselves together. I've literally never heard that once as a complaint. But man, it's sure going to make people who already are convinced of the things that you're saying feel persecuted and much better about themselves, which is what I would say is the prime point of this chapter. Is Austin, you're going to see over the next however long we spend to handle this chapter, that Austin is going to stoke that persecution complex so hard he should go talk to his bishop afterwards.
Yes, he might have broken the law of chastity.
Yeah.
He goes on, random, scattered, isolated individuals pose no real threat or benefit to anyone. To our critics, it would be better if we were not a cohesive group. See, that's the whole thing. This is why he has to lie and say he's had years of interacting with skeptics. So he can tell you with a straight face this absolute lie about what the critics are most concerned about, the Mormons doing, which is existing and being together.
Yeah.
He says in one of his rhetorical questions, aren't the by the way, can you read this one?
Yeah, I would love
to.
I was going to offer. Aren't the Latter-day Saints able to do more good as a group? Don't we help more as a unit? Don't the youth benefit from being with other youth and adult mentors? Don't men and women benefit from being part of a group? So, the way I summarize this in my notes, Austin's rhetorical questions here are him showing profound wonderment at the way that numbers work. Yes, Latter day Saints are able to do more good as a group because there are more people there with more capital, with more labor. That's the way numbers work, Austin. But the converse is also true, or the inverse is also true. When the church messes things up, or when the church members do bad things, those bad things have more impact because of these group dynamics. Again, because of the way that numbers work, Austin.
He seems to be operating from the premise that any group of people who get together is a good thing simply because they're getting together, regardless of what their motive is.
Right. And the other thing that really irritates me about this first paragraph and this first rhetorical question is this is a clear example of dishonest argumentation. And I want to explain exactly why. And that's that Austin knows full well that the criticisms against the church aren't that the church acts as a cohesive group, because this chapter comes after all his other substantive chapters where he spent time responding, well, pretending to respond, I would say, to the actual substantive criticisms. So to follow your substantive response to actual criticisms with something here that says the critics' real problem is actually that we're just a cohesive group. Well, that's bullshit, and he knows it because he spent time responding to the actual criticisms for the last however many pages.
I doubt that Austin came up with this. I think he got this from some other dumbass apologist, the kind that he hangs out with. But there's a more specific rhetorical question, which I should allow you also to read there at the bottom with the second green arrow.
Yeah, this is perfect for you and I because we've been accused of this before.
Oh, yeah.
Didn't the
Here comes the
Missourians?
persecution card.
Yeah. Didn't the Missourians in Jackson County in the 1830s persecute the Saints because they were a group? Can we pause?
Yeah,
and
they
answer that?
did. Hey, wait a second. There's some people over there. Who are they? I don't know. What do they believe? I don't know. What are they doing? I have no idea, but they're getting together. Let's run them out of the state, damn it.
That's exactly how Missouri worked in the 1830s.
Well, it is Missouri.
A group that could disrupt the status quo in Missouri. In a way, weren't the extermination Missourians of the 1830s
hang on. The extermination /order Missourians.
Yeah, extermination order Missourians of the 1830s, the spiritual forebears of some of the critics of the church today.
Wow. That's actually, I think that crosses a line. That may cross several lines.
Yeah. Whoop.
Was that you? Did you just have a brilliant idea?
Yes, that's exactly what it was.
Okay, I hope you'll share it with us at some point during the podcast. Is there
I
anything
will.
you need to take care of?
Nope.
An egg or anything?
Nope. I've got a guy coming to replace my windshield, and so I was making
What
sure that I
happened
have
to your
that arranged.
windshield?
Just a rock.
Oh my gosh. Okay. Well, those can be annoying or they can be scary or even dangerous. What was yours?
More annoying. It wasn't
Okay.
scary. Yeah.
Okay. But here we have two things. First off, let's malign the Missourians because they're persecuting the Mormons and issuing extermination orders against them just because they're getting together for a barn raising on Saturday. And then he's going to say that they're the same as you and me, Kolby. We are persecuting the Mormons for no good reason except for the barn raisings.
Yeah, it's one of those things that we talked about when we talked about the last time we were accused of supporting the extermination order. We've talked about this before, and the bottom line is it was a very complicated situation. I am not going to defend what the Missourians did. It's not right what happened to the early saints, but there is a lot more context to the story that apologists like Austin never want to tell you. And the bottom line is no, the Missourians weren't persecuting the saints because they were a group. That's a patently ridiculous claim. No, even absolutely 100% believing BYU professor, apologist, church history professor is going to tell you that that's the reason that the Mormons were chased out of Jackson County, Missouri. Period. End of story.
And for the record, I'm against extermination orders in principle. Of course, in Jacob Hansen's case, I'd make an exception. So let's see what our friend Austin Fife has to say in the next part of his letter. Every October and April, dozens of critics eagerly listen to General Conference. Woohoo! And one in particular, by the way.
I was going to say dozens. I only know of two, but
yeah, it's me and Nemo, isn't it? Is there anybody else?
No, and now with them canceling the Saturday night session, I've been doing Nemo's for a few years, but the only session that I'd agreed to watch was the shortest, the Saturday evening session. So now I'm off the hook, and I am so happy that I don't have to listen to that dreck anymore.
There's a huge break for you.
Yep.
Every October and April, dozens of critics. See, I thought I was going to talk about the guys prancing around in the underwear outside the conference center, but no. Dozens of critics eagerly listen to General Conference with the intent of providing new content for their audiences. Yeah. I see them criticize. Does that mean he watches? I don't think so. I see them criticize virtually every speaker from every angle. Thank you for noticing my thoroughness. It feels like they prefer that we say nothing. What are you talking about? If you said nothing, I wouldn't have new content for my audience.
That's what I thought too. He immediately says that the critics are eagerly listening and then turns around and says, it feels like they don't want us to say anything. Well, hang on a second.
We're having a chilling effect on their freedom of speech at General Conference is what he's arguing, I think.
Yeah, I guess.
You're violating their constitutional rights, damn it. I think they wish. It's a good thing that he's known so many critics so intimately for so many years that he knows exactly what we think, isn't it?
Yeah.
I think they wish we just kept our mouths shut and kept the TVs off that weekend. That's just weird to me. I have never, ever wanted them to keep their mouths shut with certain exceptions. And I certainly have never thought about wanting them to keep their TVs off so they don't watch General Conference, which I think is what he's talking about, that weekend or attending. No, I'm into freedom of religion. I'm into freedom of speech. I think these are good ideas. I wouldn't want to tread on any of them. Your thoughts? You're the one who wants them to shut off the TVs, I think. Isn't that right? Isn't that what you wish? That's what I think you wish.
That is not what I wish. I actually look at the opportunities when the church leaders say things as some of the most interesting opportunities we get to get insights into where the church's priorities lie, where it's shifting, where it's changing. Also, just how they. I mean, all the church, like all organizations, is constantly evolving, whether people want to acknowledge that or not. And the way you track that evolution of this organization over time is by listening to General Conference. That's basically how you do it. So no, I don't want them to keep their mouth shut because they always say really ridiculous things that we get to highlight and point out to people what they're saying. You're muted. Yes.
I count on them saying ridiculous things twice a year. And I haven't been disappointed yet.
Yeah, it almost feels like parody when you get, gems like the words of prophets don't gather value like classic comic books or vintage cars. Those are things
Yes.
that are being said in general conference. So no, Austin, we're a huge fan of the church making it so obvious how ridiculous it is to believe what they're saying.
Elder Haney. And then Austin says this, they talking about us, us, we, you and me. They especially shun principles related to covenants and standards. Is that news for Cammie that you shun principles related to covenants, Kolby?
Yeah, she'll be disappointed to learn this tonight when she's listening that I shun covenants.
Well, you can't keep it a secret forever because Austin has hung out with critics for years and he knows
So long.
Okay.
So long.
Then he asked this really good question. Can you read it? I just love it. It's bolded. It's so important to him.
It's so compelling. Is it wrong to have a standard?
Can we stop right there?
Yeah.
That's his question. Is it wrong to have a standard? Well, most people would look at that and say, I guess that depends on what the standard is. But that doesn't seem to occur to him. He just thinks he's got a trump card to play and he's going to play it in bold face type.
Yeah, I was going to say a normal person would ask, is the issue having the standard or is the issue the standard that you have? Because, like I said, Austin has spent multiple chapters, 16 other chapters, explaining why the standard that he has is okay and responding to criticisms of the standards that he has, like specifically, not just the idea that he has a standard. So that's why I think this chapter is one of the worst as far as the honesty of Austin's argumentation here.
I'll read the whole question, then let you respond.
Okay.
Is it wrong to have a standard, a goal, an aim? Are we allowed to say anything? Or must we remain silent for fear of making someone somewhere feel bad? What's your answer to that one, Kolby?
Well, what reminds me of, especially the last question, this aren't I allowed to say something? Reminds me of just like the typical passive aggressive response that we see inside Mormonism so prevalently, where if you take an issue with someone's behavior, they turn themselves into the victim. And that's what Austin's doing here. He's making the people that already agree with him that are reading this book, provided anyone who actually was a believing member got to this chapter of the book. Sometimes I feel like you and I are the only people who actually have read this stupid thing, but he's trying to make it so that that's the issue, that the issue is that critics think that the members of the church shouldn't be allowed to say anything. No, it's the specific things that we've highlighted throughout the however many hours we've spent doing this series together that are the issue, not the general notion that you're saying something.
Right. Of course, you can say anything you want, no matter how stupid it is. And I think you've proven that many times in this book. And I will show you exactly how I would answer this question, okay? Because I'm going to ask the same question back at you, okay, Austin? Turn it up. Austin, are we allowed to say anything as critics of the church? Or must we remain silent for fear of making someone somewhere feel bad? What do you think? Then he has a rhetorical question at the end. Could you take that one?
Would the critics prefer that our church was nothing more than a glorified self-help seminar mixed with Jesus? I'm going to laugh at that because later I'm going to show you that Austin makes the case that church is exactly that, a glorified self-help seminar with Jesus.
It is, but it's got like 300 billion on the side.
That's true.
That's the secret sauce that makes it all work.
Oh, and don't forget the group that makes us so angry.
Oh, right. He probably doesn't even like us getting together on a Saturday morning. Even virtually, Austin saying, no, you guys can't get together. That's bad. What is this? This is so nice. Is that me?
Yeah, I added this for you because of the dozens of critics, and I was going to say I only know of two, and so I created this. This is my tribute to your conference listening special. Greater love hath no podcaster than this.
Well, there's some truth to that because doing that podcast gig is a bitch.
Yeah, I wouldn't do it. Like I told you, I could only do the one, and even that was ruined my entire weekend.
But it was just ruined. That's all. Okay. Thank you so much for this and for acknowledging that I do sacrifice for my art.
Mm-hmm.
Back to Austin's letter. Anytime he writes, anytime there is a large group, we're back to groups. Anytime there is a large group, it requires some institutional organization. Wow. Gallup, I think it means the pollsters, Gallup reported historic lows in trust in U.S. institutions in 2022 and 2023. Distrusting institutions is trendy. This is the only reason, Kolby, that we're criticizing the LDS church is because we're trying to be hip. And it's not just the Mormon church, it's all the churches. And it's not just all the churches, it's all the institutions. This is what's happening today. We're just products of our environment.
Yep, that's the claim that if you distrust institutions, it's hilarious that, again, just like the last section we talked about, Austin doesn't want to say anything about the merits of why one might distrust these institutions. He just talks generally about why distrust is bad. And I just don't share his opinion that credulity is a virtue.
Yes, but naivete is.
Mm-hmm.
Now he quotes some unnamed Reddit user to the effect that I want to see the church do good, but I have so little trust in the organization. Well, that sounds like my sentiments. Are those your sentiments?
Yeah, I mean, I would like to see the church do good. I think
Yeah.
sometimes the church does do good. But yeah, I wouldn't even say I have so little trust in the organization. There are times when, and we'll on the very next slide, we'll use an example of why I have so little trust in the organization. There are times where I legitimately feel like the church as an institution chooses the worst possible option that it could have chosen in that scenario. It feels sometimes like parody or like
Mhm.
the old Mel Brooks musical, The Producers, where the church leaders are choosing on purpose the worst possible choice they could choose to make it obvious how or to make it so obvious how they really feel about this institution. But
Springtime for Hitler in Germany.
that's right.
Deutschland is happy and gay.
Great
Yeah, that's a great
musical.
one.
It is.
But now he has some more questions, which are along the same lines. It's like once he gets a good question about this group thing, he's just going to pursue it.
Yeah,
He's
you
like
want me
a
to read
dog
these?
with a bone.
You want me to read these?
He's like a dog with a bone without the bone. Would you?
I'd love to. Aren't critics being swept up in what's societally popular right now? Is their problem really with the church? Or do they have other influences such as general distrust of organizations that inform their skepticism?
So we only think that it's because we're upset with the church and that we're criticizing the church and that there's room to criticize them. We don't understand that subconsciously, that's not it at all. We're just being swept up in this societal fever that's current right now of distrusting institutions in general.
I'm so happy that we have Austin to tell us not just what our opinions are, what our feelings are, but also how our subconscious is working, apparently. To his
And by the
question
way,
of,
something that occurs to me, and I apologize for
that's okay.
interrupting you there. I think this proceeds from the premise. Hang on a second here. It was really good for a second here in my head, at least. Let's see if it's good when it comes out of my mouth. Distrusting institutions is trendy. Okay. So, in other words, if all institutions were should be distrusted, okay. If all institutions should be distrusted, that proves the Mormon church should be trusted. I think that's the unstated premise here.
Mm,
In other words, it makes no difference if institutions are being trusted today more than usual or not. It makes no difference what is subconsciously motivating us. The question is, are the critiques that we level against the LDS church valid?
right. And that's what I was going to say to his question there at the end. Is this basically just, is this criticism only coming because of this general distrust of organization that is informing this skepticism? if you'll just move to the next slide, I'd like to answer that question directly. No, in fact, it's not, because why would people distrust institutions like churches in 2022 and 2023? Because I actually went through and read the Gallup poll that he was talking about, or the Gallup study, whatever it was. What I have exhibited here is the header from the February 21st, 2023, just the day before my birthday. It was a wonderful gift from the SEC, where they entered into a cease and desist with the Ensign Peak. Ensign Peak is the church's for-profit investment arm, or maybe not for-profit investment arm, but it's investment arm that it uses to make money off of tithing reserve funds, trying to get the terms accurate that President Hinckley used, and the church, where the church and Ensign Peak agreed to pay a total of $5 million, the church paying at least one of those $1 million that I remember. Here's
It's
from
always
the
funny because that's just on paper, because you and I both know the church paid all five.
100%.
It says 4 against the EPA and 1 against the church specifically. And I'll go ahead and let you explain why it is the SEC did that.
Yeah, well, what I have here is from the SEC's actual press release when this order was issued that day. And so my question, I guess, back to Austin is, would this be a legitimate reason, maybe, to distrust this institution that you're defending, especially since you didn't mention this at all in your letter, which, by the way, goes all the way back to the very first episode that you did on this, RFM, before I was on board, what feels like ages ago. So this is what the SEC says. We allege that the LDS Church's investment manager, with the church's knowledge, went to great lengths to avoid disclosing the church's investments, depriving the commission and the investing public of accurate market information. The requirement to file timely and accurate information on Forms 13F applies to all institutional investment managers, including nonprofit and charitable organizations. And for people who haven't read this, I think when it first came out, Rebecca and I did an episode on this where we went through it in great detail. But the bottom line is the church, this phrase they use, the church went to great lengths to avoid disclosing the church's investments. That is detailed in this about 9-page order really well. One fact that I think is very significant is the fact that the church's own auditing department 3 times, if I remember correctly, in the course of the pattern of the 2 decades they were doing this, 2 times maybe? Okay.
I think so.
2 times flagged this and said that they did not believe that the SEC would agree with the way that Ensign Peak and the church was characterizing these transactions, or their defense to filing these 13F forms that they didn't file, or actually misrepresenting material in those 13Fs that they did file. Church auditing flagged that twice, and yet they proceeded nonetheless. That's why you have auditors, by the way, is to listen to them.
I know what happens then when we know that the church has internal auditing. They get up and they talk every 6 months in conference and lie to everybody. But when we know that they do audits and then they say, hey, this is against the law, and the church says, screw you, we're going to keep doing it the way we want. That's not the way it's supposed to work, but that is the way the Mormon church works in many instances, which is form over substance. We will have these things to make it look like we are being scrupulous in whatever regard, when actually it's just there for appearance's sake.
Absolutely. And I just shared this again. I know people who've listened to this or gotten into the details already know, but I shared this just to remind Austin, there are legitimate reasons not to trust this institution from the very time period that you're talking about. Very good reasons to not trust this institution.
Good point. It's not just this subconscious distrust against all institutions that's getting overflowing onto the church. They've earned it. They've earned their distrust, damn it. And
It's
I think
also
we should respect them for it.
It's also worth noting that study that Austin shared from Gallup, or whatever it was, poll results,
It was Gallup.
the church generally was in the top 5 most respected institutions. So it's also worth noting that, like, while yes, there were historic lows in trust in U.S. institutions in 2022 and 2023, churches were still at the top 5 most trusted institutions that were studied in this poll.
Well, we're here to get the word out and make that stop happening. Back to the letter. Now he's going to give some paltry examples of good things the church has reported that it's done.
Some quote mining too as responses from critics.
Yes, and he's going to give 4 examples. There's 2 on this slide, 2 on the next, but I think you'll be amazed. By the way, here's what I want you to notice. He's struggling to come up with examples. He manages to come up with 4, but only the first 2 have dollar signs in front of them. That's what's really interesting to me.
Hmm.
That a guy who's looking for them can only come up with these 2. In 2023 and 2024, it's easy to see, he writes, the bias. Look at the comments reacting to any clearly positive headline with the church and see the vitriol. Headline: $44 million donated to alleviate world hunger in 2023. I bet that really took a bite out of world hunger. $44 million in 2023. And then he has some comment from some Reddit user. Is the old adage, you've got to spend money to make money, applicable here? I can't believe people are cynical about the church's use of money in light of their history, including the SEC violation.
Yeah, that's the same exact year. Would you like me
Yeah.
to read the next one?
Yeah, would you? This is the second headline out of 4 with and I think it's only the second one and the last one with the dollar sign in front.
Yep. 8.7 million donated to the Red Cross in 2024. That is, and this is the quote, then he quote mines from the Reddit user. There's literally that is literally pocket change for the multi-billion-dollar church and is only donated for tax purposes. If this is even true? Well, let me just say right off the bat, that person's wrong. The church
Of
doesn't
course.
need to donate anything for tax purposes. But the
It's a
first
very
part of what
commonly held misconception.
yeah, very, very much so. But the first part of what they're saying, that this is literally just pocket change for a multi-hundred-billion-dollar church, is absolutely true.
Yeah, 8.7 million. Let's say the church has 300 billion, which I think is a little bit light as of today's date, which is December 13th, 2025. See how I worked that in there finally? They've got over $300 billion. There's 1,000 million in every billion. So that's $300,000 million is what they have, if I'm doing my math correctly. Here we're talking about 44 million and 8.7 million, respectively. That's why it's being talked about as pocket change. Now, those are the first 2. Let's see if I remember these correctly. Oh, here's the other 2. No dollar signs. Can you read the first one?
Light the World charity vending machines. Well, okay, this is a hilarious example to me because the church isn't even doing any charitable giving. Other people are doing charitable giving, and then the church gets to claim it. Where the Church of Jesus Christ of Latter-day Saints absorbed 100% of the operating costs. Oh, great move. Thank you. Very
I think it was
charitable.
a great PR move. I think
Of course.
this is pennies on the dollar for good advertising for the
Yeah,
church.
exactly. In fact, I saw they recently lit up Times Square as part of this. Interesting that he doesn't want to talk about how many millions that cost. Brilliant and greedy marketing. They keep their hundreds of billions in the bank. Members and some others pay for gifts, and LDS Inc. gets all the glory and another PR win. I don't
Yeah,
know. Seems
basically.
seems pretty accurate to me.
He's
Even if
quoting another Reddit user there. I just have to remember to make that clear for people who
that's
are just
right.
listening to the audio later on
That's right.
instead of watching the video, Colby. Then
Yep.
he's got another quote from another anonymous Reddit user. In other words, he's saying church does good thing, and you just can't satisfy these anonymous Reddit users. They're just so critical. They won't acknowledge that the church does any good whatsoever, but are always trying to find something bad in it.
Yep.
And can you read the second one?
Yeah. Free ice cream for visitors at BYU football games. I do not have the exact quote, but I recall vivid. Oh, I'm sorry. This is. I can't tell if this. Oh, this is Austin. Back to Austin. I'm sorry. So free ice cream for visitors at BYU football games.
Okay, now
I
wait a
do not.
second. Now, he has tried to come up with 4 different examples, as many examples as possible. One would think the best examples he can come up with of the church being good. And the first one's 44 million
Right.
to world hunger. Second in 2023. Second one's 8.7 million to the Red Cross in 2024. And that exhausts his supply apparently because immediately he's reduced to talking about the light the world vending machines and rounding it off with free ice cream at BYU football games.
Yeah, and I'm sorry I was a little distracted. What I was looking up was I was trying to figure out a good estimate of how much money the church makes on about that 300 billion they have every hour. And the church makes about 2 to 3 million dollars in steady investment returns an hour on interest.
Wow, that's more than I make.
But it just to again, and Austin's just going to say, "Oh, you're proving me right. Look at how cynical you're being." But if they donated, if you go back, there was the $8.7 million
Yes.
to the
So how
Red
many
Cross.
hours is that?
That was about 4 hours. 4
And the
hours
church
of
doesn't have to do anything.
right.
It's investment money.
Right. That means they're making because that's you're making investment income like that every single hour of the day, not just the hours you could be working. That means they're making 50 to 80 million dollars a day. So all of this right here is less than 1 day's interest income that the church is making. And that's assuming that they're not making money in any other way, that they're not receiving additional surplus tithing receipts, which we know that they are probably. This is less than 1 day. 1 day, really half of 1 day if it's $80 million, just to put it into perspective about what
Half of one
Austin's
day
talking
spread
about.
out over 2 years.
Yeah, very charitable. That's a whole lot of person script, I think.
You know, C.S. Lewis once said something that I thought was interesting about charitable giving for a Christian. And he says, you know, some people say a tithing is a tithing or it's not a tithing. And I'm not at all here to tell you how much anybody should pay in charitable giving as a Christian, but he gave it as his personal opinion that the charitable offerings of a Christian should pinch a little. In other words, you give enough, regardless of how much you have, you give enough that you have to sacrifice a little bit to scrape by. It should pinch you a little bit.
Hmm.
Otherwise, he felt like it was missing something.
Sure.
Now, that is the last example. So there's the 4. And now he goes, "Oh, this is you. What are you doing,
Yeah.
Austin? Tell us about this."
I added this because in each of those examples, he gives one of the church's, one of his best examples of charitable giving, which is, roughly 14 hours in a 24-hour period of how much money the church would make on investment income. Um, this is from Austin's first chapter, where he highlights manipulations and logical fallacies. And one of his manipulation tactics that he outlines there is quote mining, when you go and you look for unflattering quotes in the past. And then in his third column, he's got a description of why these are dishonest argumentation or manipulation tactics. And he says, it is disingenuous. Scouring a target's social media feed to find anything damaging is similar. I'm not going to say he was scouring Reddit to find things that were damaging, but what I will say is that Austin went scouring Reddit to find the most unhinged criticisms he could find, or the least reasonable criticisms, I guess I would say, so that then he could continue to stoke his persecution complex.
Yeah,
And
he's
that's just where
presenting these outliers as the norm among the critics of the church to his audience.
exactly. And that's why I have this. What are you doing, Austin? Like, you in your first chapter set this standard. And I love that we've returned to this so often because he has violated these own manipulation tactics and logical fallacies that he said shouldn't be used, that make people victims and targets. If people remember back over a year ago now to that first episode we did. But I'm just pointing out, like, to write a book like this where then you violate your own substantive standards is so wild to me.
It is. Let's count, shall we? Because I love to count. Let's see how many quote mining episodes he does just in this one letter. Okay, so at the very beginning, there's 2. And actually, he gave a name for one, and that just shocked me.
Yeah.
That was Bill Maher. But there's
Yep.
2 there. 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, 6, 7, 8. So far. I think that qualifies as quote mining.
Mm-hmm.
All right. So, did you want to go ahead and read about the free ice cream for visitors at BYU? He's quote mining so bad that he remembers something, but he couldn't go back and find it. This one eluded him. So he's just going to recapitulate it here from memory. This not nice comment from a critic on Reddit.
Yeah, so he says, I do not have the exact quote, but I recall vividly someone on X, Twitter, in the fall of 2023 who claimed that free ice cream for visitors at BYU football games was a ploy to gain converts and thereby make more tithing money. The X Twitter user's math was something like If they have a 1% conversion rate on 3,000 visitors, that's 30,000 converts per game. If each convert pays $10,000 a year in tithing in perpetuity, then the church gets a huge return on their investment. I'll just go ahead and say the church isn't thinking like that. They really aren't. They're thinking about this from a PR perspective. They're thinking about how nice it makes the Mormons look, how nice it makes BYU look. It's as simple as that. They're not looking at these expenditures as a way to get converts. At least I don't think so.
You know, it would be nice to think that the church did nice things just to do nice things, but my experience of how many years since 1978, almost half a century now, in the church has taught me that everything in the church, including up to and including giving free ice cream to non-members, is a missionary effort. There's always this underlying motive, right? This ulterior motive of joining the church, because we want to put ourselves in the best light possible so that people will join us. And unfortunately, that's part of what makes Mormonism and Mormons so plastic and artificial and fake.
Mhm.
There's always this underlying and I keep wanting to say subterranean, but that's the wrong word. Underlying, I said it before,
Subconscious.
motive that they have. What is it?
Subconscious.
That wasn't the sub, but we'll go with it. Subconscious motive. It's not subconscious. It's ulterior. That's what it was. It wasn't
like
sub, it was
subliminal,
ult.
maybe. Subliminal message, maybe, is what you're thinking. Yeah.
That ulterior motive that they got, just like j'accuse Jonah Barnes of having an ulterior motive of trying to look good, and hence the Mormon church looking good when he's out making his short little video about Robert Boylan, fellow apologist Robert Boylan's medical condition, otherwise unspecified, and Robert Boylan's GoFundMe page, that Jonah Barnes went out and made a video to direct people's attention to that page and request them to make a donation. Yeah, it's all performative.
Yeah.
In my opinion.
Especially at the institutional level, I would completely agree with you. Individual members do things legitimately out of the goodness of their hearts. It's one of the things that's the most difficult for me about reconciling with the church is that, there's that old adage, the church is perfect, but the people aren't. And my experience has been, if anything, the inverse is true, meaning that the church members are often so much better and so much more moral upstanding than the institution that they belong to. When you look at the behavior of the institutional church versus the behavior of your average everyday member, I mean, yes, they can sometimes do and say some silly things, but for the most part, I think they are an exceptionally good group of people that are well motivated, meaning that they have good intentions for their fellow man. There is, of course, always that prime directive of making the church look good, I think, for every Mormon. But I do think at the institutional level, what you said is true. I don't think the institutional church does anything that isn't a calculation, because it is a giant hundreds of billion-dollar business. They have an army of lawyers. They have an army of PR people. They have an army of social media listening people. They have an army of survey generating PhDs that do stuff like this. It's really hard to see any relationship between the church that may have existed at the close of Jesus Christ ministry and the organization that tries to claim his name today. It's just bewildering, the difference between those two.
Yes, and I don't mean anything terribly sinister on the part of the LDS Church, but there is always this ulterior motive. And there's a song lyric from the musical Call Me Madam, Irving Berlin. George Sanders sings it in the movie version. And what he sings is, I only want what's the best thing for you. And the best thing for you would be me. That's exactly what the church is thinking all the time to everybody who's not a member. I only want what's the best thing for you, and the best thing for you would be to be a Mormon. That's why the ulterior motive is always there. So now we have this next slide from Austin's Light on Truth letter, which reads as follows. The truth is, oh my gosh, he waited till chapter 17 to tell us what the truth is? He could have started with this and saved us a lot of trouble. The truth is, according to Austin Fife, the truth is that the Church of Jesus Christ of Latter-day Saints is excellent. at providing aid and helping for the right reason and with little fanfare. That's why he had so much trouble finding examples, is because the church doesn't do any fanfare when it does nice things.
Mm-hmm.
What I see the church doing is rushing to the microphones when it does charitable contribution work and making public announcements and all sorts of things. And that's kind of what I see. I
It's
don't
also
see them doing things with little fanfare. And I don't see them. Are they excellent at providing aid? I suppose at what little aid they provide, they're excellent at.
Yeah, the other thing I'm really struck by is him saying that they do it with little fanfare. Like the Giving Machine initiative that they do um, is nothing but fanfare. Like they literally lit up Times Square. They've lit up like giant other like commercial areas. Like nothing could be done louder. I like that's just a wild thing to say to me. And then to turn around and say, well, the other data point I think is important to remember is that Austin selected only examples from after 2019. And the reason that 2019 is a very specific year that I would tie people to is because in 2019, December of 2019, we learned about the Ensign Peak whistleblower, David Nielsen. And as a result of that, folks like the institution known as the Widow's Mite, or the organization known as the Widow's Mite, started reporting more on what we could say about the church's annual charitable giving. And we have seen exponential increases in that charitable giving since that time. So it's really difficult for me to take what Austin's written here seriously, for the reasons we've just talked about. And if you like the increased charitable giving that the church has been doing, Austin, guess who you have to thank for that? You have to thank critics of the church who hold the church accountable by calling them out, because there has literally been an exponential increase in the amount of charitable giving the church has done from before and after people are watching it sit on his dragon's hoard.
Wow. Great point, Kolby. It's always exhilarating talking with you, whether publicly or privately. I'm going to give you this next line, okay? Because this next line is breathtakingly bad.
I am sure the church could be doing more in the same way that I could be doing more. Why is that so breathtakingly bad, RFM?
On so many levels, I think. The first thing is that not only does he know what we're thinking, he knows what the church is thinking too. He's tacitly admitting that the church isn't doing enough after claiming that they do. And then, like a good Mormon boy, he's shouldering the guilt on himself. Because really, the church isn't doing anything more than I am, and I could be doing more. So if I could be doing more, it's okay for the church to be sitting on its dragon's hoard.
Yeah. That's like blaming yourself for having one extra cookie because the guy sitting next to you ate 300 billion extra cookies.
The church really, really does a mind freak on its members.
It really does. I mean, to say something like this, this will sound so harsh about Austin, but he's just the target of this general sentiment that I see all the time in the church. But the church really does convince its members of stuff like this, that they need to apologize for not doing more when the church has so much. They're sitting on so much money. It's so much money that they make $80 million an hour. I won't touch $80 million in my entire lifetime, and they make it in an hour. In the
I won't
time that
either,
we've
but
been
I'd like
doing
to
this
at least
podcast,
touch it. I'd
so
like to at least touch it.
just to put that into perspective for people listening to us, we're at 58 minutes and 30 seconds of recording. They've made $80 million while you and I have done this podcast.
I haven't made half that much off this podcast. True. No, it's just really amazing, isn't it? I'm sure the church could be doing more in the same way that I could be doing more. Austin, okay, now look, when you get around to watching this, hopefully you're going to watch this when it premieres tonight. Look at me, Austin. Pay attention. You are doing more than the church is doing. You are paying 10% of your income minimum to an organization for it to do charitable work on your behalf. The LDS church isn't spending 10% of its income for charitable humanitarian aid. You are doing more than the church is doing, and you're doing a lot more than the church is doing. He goes on here. Austin says, I suspect, and this is another thing about this. I'm not sure I've seen so many, I suspect this is what these other people are thinking. I suspect that no matter what or who the Church of Jesus Christ of Latter-day Saints, this book would be a pamphlet if he stopped using the full name of the church every other sentence. I suspect that no matter who the Church of Jesus Christ of Latter-day Saints helps and how much money is donated, there are a great many people who will sneer and make accusations. Now, that's not true, Austin. That's not true. You know why we're making the accusations, because the accusations are true, and you're doing more to help people than the LDS Church is doing to help people.
Mm-hmm.
But you have to think that no matter how much the church donated, we're just about criticizing because it's the hip thing to do, institutions and all that.
Can I read
of course we wouldn't. In fact, we give credit for the church for doing what it does, but we do point out it does seem woefully inadequate compared to the assets it has.
Right.
Kolby.
And then he says, so I stopped listening to them. Would you advance the slide, please?
I will. But I just want to relish. I want to roll that sentence around in my mouth a little bit, okay? So I stopped listening to them. Okay. Why? Because he suspected. Why did he stop listening to the critics? Because he suspected that no matter how much the church helped out, they wouldn't think it was enough. Okay.
Mm-hmm.
Next slide. Here we go.
So I created this.
It's Austin. It's poor Austin.
It is Austin. He's hiding from truth, facts, reason, and a single coherent thought. I just think it's so funny that he comes out and tells you so clearly that in response to feeling the cognitive dissonance of legitimate criticisms against the church and how little it does with its dragon's hoard to actually help humanity, Austin tells you outright, I stopped listening to them because it made me feel uncomfortable. That's what he's doing. He's running from his cognitive dissonance. To quote from the Book of Mormon musical, turn it off like a light switch. Just go click. It's our nifty little Mormon trick. That's what he's doing here. He's running from facts that disconfirm his worldview. And okay, if you want to go ahead and do that, and as an adult, admit to that in this book you've written, I suppose that's for your prerogative to choose from. But then I'm going to get to make an image like this that shows you hiding from all of the things that you can't handle.
Well, you know that insight into what he wrote there does do a better job of explaining why he won't touch either of us with a 10-foot pole.
Mm-hmm. Which one are you of the four things he's hiding from?
I don't know. I really don't know. What do you think? What do you think? Let me ask you.
I've got dibs on a single coherent thought because I'd like
that's the most I'm allowed by my probation officer. One single coherent thought a week.
Yeah, I don't know.
It is interesting that he admitted it. This is where he gave away the game. This is where he disclosed who he really is. One only wonders whether he'd started not listening to his critics before or after he spent several years among them.
I have to say, this is an AI-generated claymation masterpiece. I just have to say it. The emotion on the face, the way it captured Austin's, it's just chef's kiss. No notes. No notes.
He's got that whole Austin Fife vibe going on.
It really
I love
does.
it. Masculinity. Okay, he's not exactly writing what he knows, but okay. Masculinity. Austin's going to talk about this. And he's going to say, you wouldn't catch him in flannel. Toxic masculinity. I don't know why he leads with toxic masculinity. I guess because it's, I don't know.
Because I'll tell you exactly why. It's because this type of online Mormon apologist, they are so steeped in this weird culture that they're steeped in, talking about, aren't the critics just about distrusting all institutions? This is just the particular brand or this particular blend of online echo chamber he's found himself in, where this is a buzzword to now talk about why toxic masculinity is a bad thing, but true masculinity, notice the no true Scotsman there, true
Yes, that's why
masculinity,
I underlined it. Thank you for noticing.
true masculinity is so great, and it comes right from the church.
Yes, Mormon masculinity is the only true masculinity. All
Mhm.
other masculinities are toxic.
Because I know when I look at an individual like Jonah Barnes, I think, what a masculine man.
Yes, he's a man's man. He lives up in the same state as I do. I think on the same side of the mountains. I hope to run into him someday and break bread with him. It's a little Baker humor. Okay, back to Austin Fife. Toxic masculinity is a popular subject in the culture right now. So let me squeeze it somehow into my book, as it should be. Abusive and domineering men should be stopped and taught. They should be stopped and taught and cited. Now we get some more green arrows. Can you read this first green arrow, the rhetorical question that's going to prove his case?
Yeah. Is there a better program than the Church of Jesus? Excuse me, the Church of Jesus Christ of Latter-day Saints for teaching boys how to be truly masculine?
You
That
can't even
wasn't
get through the name of the church without yawning.
that
That's how
wasn't
long it is.
pretend. That wasn't pretend, but I did have a little
So is
something
there a
there.
better program? Well, obviously there can't be. I mean, that's the rhetorical question's answer for which he's searching.
He doesn't
And yet
even define.
I would look at it and think there must be,
One
and
would think if
probably a
you're
lot of them.
sorry, one would think if you're gonna talk about true masculinity versus toxic masculinity, one would think that you would define what true masculinity is. Instead, it's just completely unstated. Like this is the worst book I've ever read in my entire life. I feel like I've read bad Reddit posts with more insight than Austin's entire book.
This is worse than a DC comic. Oh, I'm going to get hate mail for that one.
Those reflect the opinions of Radio Free Mormon and Radio Free Mormon alone.
Look, even fans of DC should agree with that sentiment.
I'm not a comic guy.
I mean, otherwise they're saying this isn't worse than a DC comic. Okay. So, is there a better program than the church for teaching boys how to be truly masculine? Obviously, he thinks the answer to that is no. I think the answer must be yes. Then he says, following up that, he's really going to cross-examine the critic on the stand. He's going to bust him like a chestnut. Doesn't the church do a great job? Picture him as the attorney doing the cross-examination. Doesn't the church do a great job of giving boys and men a responsibility and a role to play in society and in the church? Aren't the church's doctrines and teachings directing boys and men to think of others and serve God? I feel like this is the part of the movie where we came in. Wasn't he making the same argument a few chapters ago about why
Yeah.
it is that women are so well taken care of in the church and why they're equal because the men are told to be good to them?
Yes. His prime defense for how good the church is for women is how good it makes the men. And you may be stealing a joke I'm going to get to in several slides.
I will intentionally not be funny for the next several slides. Usually it's unintentional, but I'm going to try and make it intentional this time.
Thank you for sacrificing for me. I appreciate it.
You're
Do you want me
welcome.
to read this? Do you want me to read this last question?
Yeah, please. These are all Austin's questions to cement his case.
Yeah, the case he never made. Isn't the church a great place for good men to mentor boys? A place where men
It's a really good place for that. Wink, wink.
a place where men teach true masculinity.
There's that true again.
Yeah. Aren't the boys of the church less likely to become delinquent and thus less likely to be destructive or toxic?
Yeah, because I don't know. It sounds like he's saying that delinquent boys have a greater cohort that are destructive or toxic. I don't know that he's established that. I don't think it matters because I doubt that only delinquent boys, whatever that's defined as meaning, by the way, only delinquent boys are the ones who are toxic, and it doesn't exist in the church. No, there's no toxic masculinity in the church, only good masculinity, only true masculinity in the Mormon church.
Yeah, no delinquent or destructive men in the church, mentioning no apostles' brothers in particular.
Yes, and by the way, we have to say this. It was wittily said, and I laughed inside where it counts. But for people who don't know, and especially people in the future for whom this will be a history lesson, we have an apostle who was just called by the president, the new president of the church, President Oaks, to be in the first presidency, and that is D. Todd Christofferson, whose brother is just finally hitting the papers and hitting the headlines, has now been arrested on federal charges of child abuse from like a month ago. He's an elderly person. He's got a long history of this, it sounds like, from witnesses, from the witness statements that I've heard. So I don't know. Is that toxic masculinity, Austin, or is that true masculinity? You tell me. Did you have anything else you wanted to say about this?
No. Thank you for driving that home.
Thanks for bringing up Wade. I wouldn't have thought of that. Austin Fife continues to beg all the questions. That was my little headline for this.
Mm-hmm.
Now, this is really good because we talked about begging questions last week. Remember, begging questions is what it's called when you commit the logical fallacy of not proving your premise is true. All right? You're begging the question of whether your fundamental underlying premise on which you're basing your argument is true. Those have to be true, too, for your argument to be valid. So Austin Fife continues to beg all the questions. Let's see if we can see any examples of that here. He writes, are there other successful large organizations where men are taught as successfully by other men how to be a force for good in their families and in the world? You see, the thing that is so, I don't know, frustrating, I suppose, about this is that it's obvious to me that Austin has no clue. He has done no research in this area, not even the slightest, tiniest bit of research, not even enough to Google it in. The question. He's just presuming that because it's the Mormon church must do it better than anybody else. And he'll frame this question so that he'll try and get people to agree with him. This is another one of the fundamental problems of Mormonism, is that Mormons are taught to believe that whatever the church does, it does it better than anybody else simply because it is the church. And that goes from art to films to music to scriptures to temple endowments to everything. With the result that many Mormons are like I was for many years, which is conflicted. Part of us realizes that Mormon quiche is dreck. It really is substandard, and in some cases, horribly substandard. But on the other side, we know we have to cheer it on as being the best thing since sliced bread. And I know that I was with that for a long time. There was an article, not an article, a cartoon by Grondel many, many years ago, which really captured this, I thought, in a clever way. He has a conference, a general conference setting. And one of the heads, right, with the glasses, the bald heads with the glasses, is up speaking. And what he is saying is this. He's saying, the first sign that you're on the road to apostasy is thinking that church art is tacky. That's a funny line, but it's also more than that. I think that contains a great truth. That is the first line, the first step on the road to apostasy is when you allow yourself to think for yourself about things produced by the church, which is not in line with the way the church wants you to think about them.
Mm-hmm. Because it shows that you're willing to start doing that comparison, and you're realizing that as you compare to other groups, religious art, iconography, scriptures, like you said, you're starting to realize the deficiency of what the church has on offer. That was wonderfully said. And if I can quote you back to you, I remember a few years ago, you did an interview with John Dehlin where you talked about your entire journey from TBM to RFM. And you have this line in it that's resonated with me, or that really resonated with me at the time. You talk about, I think you were talking specifically about General Conference, and you were talking about how when you first joined the church, you thought of it as like this gigantic feast that had been prepared. And everybody is actually eating nothing. Everybody's wasting away. And that's how hopefully I'm getting it, the memory. It's been several years. Hopefully I'm getting that mostly right. Do you want to say anything
talking about?
Do you want to
Oh,
say
are
anything
you
about
going
it?
on?
No, I just wanted to say, do you want to say anything about it? Did I get it mostly right?
Yes, yes. I tell you, that's exactly right because that's how it's presented. We're all being spiritually fed, and I go there and I'm just starving to death because there's nothing on that plate. It's like Hamlet says, what is it? I eat the air, promise crammed.
I think you even quoted that in that thing.
No, no, no. Really? I eat
I
the air, promise crammed?
you might have.
That's exactly what we do at conference. We eat the air, promise crammed. It's also
Well,
like Julius Caesar says in the play. Yond Cassius has a lean and hungry look. He thinks too much. Such men are dangerous. So there's two Shakespeare plays quoted on the subject. I love that one about I eat the air, promise crammed.
well, and
That should be on a sign in
I
front of General Conference, that quote.
I came to a very similar realization, and I remember it very distinctly because it was probably 2020, maybe 2021. I remember going to a stake conference where our stake president, he had been in for about 3 or 4 years. This is the same stake president that I would end up dealing with in 2021 and 2022 about the child abuse situation. The guy who told me that God works in mysterious ways, and he wanted to testify that the child abuser was called of God as a bishop, that guy, he would end every single meeting that he was at, even like a normal sacrament meeting where a stake president will come and sometimes have to give, announcements or will give a brief talk or whatever. He would end every single one going on and on for 2 to 3 minutes about how wonderful the meeting was, how wonderful the spirit was, how much we'd been edified and uplifted. And I remember at the end of the stake conference, he had done the same thing, and I remember as we were driving home saying to Cami, I don't understand why he does that. And she said, what do you mean? And I said, it's all right for a state conference to be valuable, to be something where we're gathered with our community, for us to feel the spirit there. That's totally fine for a state conference to just be a state conference. And yes, there are absolutely those sessions of state conference or sacrament meeting or general conference where you really do have those feelings, or at least I experienced that during my time in the church. But it's this constant need to act like every single little trivial thing you do in the church is some earth shattering revelation, like it's on the Mount of Transfiguration, that I just couldn't stomach. And this was still probably 2 years or a year before I really went through my faith crisis. But I remember, so just to add to what you're saying, the truth of that quote that you had used from the comic, it was that realization that I was saying what I was uncomfortable with isn't that he was finding value in that. I was uncomfortable with the notion that I had to pretend along with him that
Yes.
what we had was anything more than a standard state conference. And I just
That
wasn't
is
willing to
what
do it.
that's what the opposite of thinking church art looks tacky looks like.
Right.
And we have all seen it.
Right.
And the one who's the worst about it, I think now in the current crop of church leaders is Elder Eyring.
Mm,
He does
I
that all the time. He says, "You have felt the Spirit of God tonight. You have felt warm. These feelings tell you that God loves you." Yeah.
yeah.
And they also tell you that I got an A in public speaking.
That's right. I if we pull that back up, the other thing I wanted to just say about this first quote, just so that people can see exactly where Austin is begging the question, is if we look at this first sentence, he says, "Are there other successful large organizations where men are taught as successfully by other men?" Right there is the question begging. That is the premise that has not been established. And to everything you had said, everything I've just said, the one last thing I'll say about Austin and begging the question is, remember, folks, the introduction to this book, the title of this book is question begging. When Austin's talking about this journey that he had with his wife and saying, she told me that if I could find more light and truth outside of the church's system, that she would follow me wherever it went. But the thing is, the way Austin defines light and truth very clearly, as you can see in this book, and as you can see in his rhetorical strategies, like you just pointed out here, RFM, all of it is question begging. Every single bit of it. He's defining all of these terms the way he learned in the church he grew up associating with, has really shown no evidence that he even understands the arguments that contradict his position, and he just stays inside this closed loop system, begging questions all around.
Yes. For instance, when he says men are taught by the church how to be a force for good in their families. Let's just take that, okay? What he means by that, in addition to being a good father and a good husband in general terms, he means more than that. What he means is you are a good father. You're a good father in the family, a force for good in your families by paying tithing. You're a force for good in your families by paying fast offering. You're a force for good by having morning prayer and evening prayer and prayer at meals with your families, at which you will generally thank God for the blessings of being a Mormon in some way or other. Okay. Family home evening, even if I don't know, do they still do this? You got to have family home evening. You've got to get your family to church. That's your responsibility. And on top of all this stuff, you have to devote, in order to be a force for good in your family, you have to devote hours a week to be away from your family.
Right.
Because you got to be doing stuff for the church. And the more priesthood responsibility you get, the higher up in the totem pole you get, the more you're going to be away from your family, which means that the most righteous men in the Mormon church are a force for good in their families by abandoning them.
That is so true. And, I once talked to, I'll just say, a family member about that notion right there. This family member was called as a bishop and had been a bishop for about 3 years. And I was picking their brain about what you just talked about, which is how much time it pulls you away from their family. And he said, the Lord just makes it work. I do everything that I'm asked to do, and I don't know how to explain it, but the Lord makes it work. I just don't believe that. I believe that the way you show up for your family is by actually showing up for your family, not by spending it with other people, as noble as that is. And I do want to be really clear about that. There are people and there are men in the church who sacrifice all of this time. I think of leaders I had when I was a youth, and I look at it from my perspective now with my own little kids. My oldest is 12. And I think about all the time my youth leader spent with me at scout camp, at activities. And I just think those were great friends and mentors. And I'm so grateful for that sacrifice. But the church had no right to ask that of them. They had their own little families that they should have been building those memories with instead of me. That's the reality. And they did. And they didn't. And you can't get that time back. I'm looking at it now with my kid being 12. I only have 6 years with him left in my house. That is time you never get back. You can't do it again. You can't sorry. I'm getting emotional about this weirdly. You can't get that time back. And there are so many people who have sacrificed that time they did have with their kids when they were little and they needed their parents to be there for this cause that ultimately just treats them like a cog in a machine. The second they don't bend when the church says bend, the church throws them out. And your family doesn't do that to you. Real family doesn't do that to you.
And then the church teaches your kids that you're the bad guy. I'll continue to read this part, okay? But this is where he really harks back to his woman's chapter and how great women have it in the Mormon church, better than in any other church, by the way. He asked, without a trace of irony, aren't women the biggest beneficiary of the church's ability to create good men? So he's gone from another position that he's failed to establish about creating good men, and now he's asking a rhetorical question about women based upon it. See, he begs all the questions. He goes on, aren't so many problems in society tied to fatherlessness? Doesn't the gospel of Jesus Christ remedy many root causes of fatherlessness? He is just phoning this in. This chapter, it's like if he had something important to say in a chapter that's titled Other, I can understand his writing a 17th chapter, but I do not understand writing an additional chapter titled Other to include this kind of dreck. His last question on this page is, if the world, like members of the church, practiced the principles of chastity, charity, temperance, and patience, wouldn't we have fewer divorces and family abandonments? You see, this really is the fundamental Mormon point of view. which is, if the world were Mormon, we'd all get along fine.
Which is exactly when we were talking about the Missourian issue and isn't the church a group that can change the status quo? That's exactly here's the reality. That attitude is what led to the Mormon Missouri War in Missouri. It is. When you think that everyone is either going to be converted or they're just going to have to leave, that's exactly the attitude that led to the conflict between the Saints and the Missourians. And I want to be real clear, since I just said that, I'm not justifying the violence on either side of that equation. I'm just saying there is a reality to the fact that if your perspective is you need to assimilate or get out, you kind of force people's hand. And that's exactly what happened in Missouri. And that's exactly what Austin's saying here. Wouldn't the world be so awesome if it was Mormon? I actually created a funny illustration of this also.
Is that going to be on the next slide?
Yeah.
Oh.
So this is a bunch of Mormons celebrating how awesome they are and patting themselves on the back for being so awesome. But it's the exact same sentiment that Austin's talking about. It's why he engages so regularly in this question begging, because he truly believes it. And the sad thing is he truly believes it because he really doesn't have experience with any other system. And that's been shown when he actually talks about those other systems, that he doesn't understand them. I've shared this with you before, I think just offline, but there was this great exchange once when Sean Hannity and Christopher Hitchens were talking about religion. And Hitch said to Sean Hannity, in response to something that Hannity had said, I'm sorry to have to say this, but it seems like you've never read any of the arguments against your position ever. And that's how it feels when you read Austin's responses to these critics he's pulled these quotes together from supposedly the most unhinged takes on Reddit. But like you and I have said over and over and over again, they don't represent my arguments or my criticisms against the church. So if Austin's interested in those, maybe he can respond to these videos.
Wow, great point. This makes me want to go back up to an earlier slide, which I'm going to do right here. Let me see here if I can find this. I think it's after this because I want to make sure I'm remembering what he said. He says, after years of interacting with skeptics. Yeah, damn it. He said it, didn't he? After years of it's okay. I got it. I know how to make sense of this. This is how he spent years interacting with skeptics. There we go. That explains the mystery.
Oh, I love it.
Otherwise, this whole story doesn't make any sense, does it?
It doesn't make any sense to me.
No. All right, we're getting close to the end of this. You'll all be happy to know that. The end of this chapter. I gave this one line its own slide.
Actually, I did, but that's okay.
You gave this quote its own slide. And why did you do that, Kolby?
Because every time Austin is talking about women's issues in the church, it's so hilarious that the only thing he can say is the church is so awesome for women because of how awesome it is for men. So I have it here. I've got his quote, "Aren't women the biggest beneficiary of the church's ability to create good men?" And I'm restating it this way. You can tell how good Mormonism is for its women by how good it is for the men. It's just amazing that he has this huge blind spot when it comes to this.
I wonder if Tikla agrees with him on that. She probably does.
She'd have to ask Austin first, according to the way Austin thinks.
Well, maybe she can find time, or at least pry his hands away from his ears. Now we get to violence. I like violence because they smell so nice. On March 30th, 2024, a news story was published. This is Austin writing. A news story was published about a teenage boy from Gilbert, Arizona. Okay, so what he's going to talk about is these Gilbert goons who beat some kid. I think they killed him. Jeez. And how there was a story that went out about how they were Mormons because they're from Gilbert, Arizona. And then it wasn't Mormons, but maybe one was. I mean, they're from Gilbert, Arizona. Anyway, he's once again playing the persecution card, I think. All right. News story. Teenage boy, Gilbert, Arizona, who beat up another boy at a party. The victim died from his injuries. A critic of the Church of Jesus Christ posted online the original news article with the following now deleted caption. Arizona Hometown News. A group of wealthy Mormon teens bullied and beat a 16-year-old to death in Gilbert, Arizona. The local Mormon community collaborated to protect the perpetrator, and the Gilbert police refused to charge until national pressure made them. So this is what a critic wrote, okay, somewhere on the internet. Now, there's a story here, which I'm going to tell you. But he goes on, I was upset that something like that could happen among our ranks. And I would be too. But can you realize it has nothing to do with the proposition of any truth claims of Mormonism? Austin, can you realize that? Having lived briefly in neighboring Queen Creek, Arizona, I was stunned that something like that could happen. Then I read the news article. Well, that was a good idea. I'm glad he finally read the news article. There was not one mention of the boys' religious affiliation, no indication of a conspiracy to cover up by local ward or stake members in the news story, and nothing about the Gilbert police delaying pressing charges. Nothing about the boy or the details surrounding the incident indicated that the perpetrators were faithful Latter-day Saints. See how he stuck that in? Presumably, faithful Latter-day Saints wouldn't murder somebody, although it has happened. Okay? So now here's what happened. I looked at this and I thought, well, I wonder where it is that this happened on the internet. And I looked it up and I was able to find it. Now, to understand what's going on here from my perspective as I'm getting ready for the show, in this instance, what I did was I went through the entire chapter, the other chapter in Austin's book, and I made slides. Okay. I made slides before I read it. And the slide part making is because sometimes I'll read it before I make slides. This time I just made the slides.
Mm-hmm.
And the point of the slides is different. The point of the slides is making sure I have every word that he put down.
Right.
And making sure that, I have it figured correctly, blah, blah, blah. But I have everything there. What I was doing is, as I was doing that in sequence, I would read slide by slide what it was that was written in this chapter. So this is as far as I got. He will go on to address the same thing after I had discovered it myself. Okay, that's the point I'm trying to make and why it is that happened. So it's Chino Blanco. Chino Blanco, back on whatever date it was, had posted at ex-Mormon Reddit, none of the Gilbert goons are Mormon. Oh, excuse me. No, below that. This is what he had originally posted.
Yep.
Which is what was quoted in that letter. Arizona Hometown News, a group of wealthy Mormon teens. And then he has pictures of two of them. What happened is that the next day, Chino Blanco posted on the same forum at ex-Mormon Reddit a complete retraction of what it is he had posted the day before to make it clear that he was wrong. And this is what Chino Blanco posted as the retraction here. None of the Gilbert goons are Mormon. It is a rumor. There are a lot of Mormons in Gilbert. Some fool started the rumor that some of the goons are Mormon, and I foolishly boosted that baseless rumor. So that is a retraction. That's a mea culpa. That's what ethics looks like in real time from Chino Blanco.
Yeah, which is great.
I discovered this, right? I'm sorry, what?
Oh, I was just going to say, which is great. And I actually did a panel with Chino a few sunstones ago, maybe this last sunstone. But one thing I wanted to say, just to kind of defend Chino a little bit here, is I served my mission in the Tempe mission in Arizona. Gilbert was in our mission, and I served part of my mission in Gilbert. When he says there are a lot of Mormons in Gilbert, Gilbert is like 85% Mormon, I would guess. I'll look that up, but just to say, like, I've never seen a place, like one town that was so Mormon outside of Utah ever. So I'm just saying, like, absolutely, he needs to do the mea culpa. He shouldn't have amplified something that he didn't know was true. But I can understand why, if you knew that fact, if you have experience with Arizona and experience with Gilbert, which I'm pretty sure Chino does, that you would see something like that and think that seems reasonable, that it could at least be true. It wasn't like immediately disqualifying based on the number or the proportion of Mormons in Gilbert, I guess is what I'm saying.
Right. Thank you. So, I said China. Did you write this? I think you wrote this, didn't you?
Nope.
No, I think you did because you wrote China instead of Chino.
Okay.
Compare China Blancos, it says. Compare Chino Blanco's response to finding out he had repeated incorrect information with that of Austin Fife, when we point out time and again he has gotten things wrong in his Light on Truth letter. This is, I think, the most deliciously ironic statement in his entire letter. It wasn't ironic when he wrote it, when he chastised Chino Blanco for publishing it initially, but giving him credit, which he will do here in the next slide. He will give him credit. He will admire him for doing the right thing and telling the truth when he finds out he's wrong. Apparently, it's one thing to admire another for telling the truth when he finds out he's wrong from doing the same thing yourself. Because the irony, of course, is that it may not have been ironic when he wrote it, but now, a year into critiquing publicly his letter and pointing out time after time after time after time that Austin Fife has gotten things wrong in his letter, I do not see him doing what Chino Blanco did and posting a correction and a retraction and a mea culpa. Do you see that, Kolby?
No, the last I've seen from Austin speaking about this, I mean, he did make changes last January to his letter, crediting nobody for why he was making changes, and that he incorporated some of the suggestions we had. But no, I've seen no such mea culpa. In fact, the last interaction I had seen from Austin, actually last night, as I was looking up an image that I could use to make that him holding his ears image, I saw a tweet that he'd sent out claiming that we were harassing him and using violent imagery. That's the last I had seen from Austin directed.
That was a
toward
testimony gunfight
Yeah.
where we were a couple of gunslingers and we were taking pot shots at Austin Fife hiding behind his Light on Truth letter.
Mhm.
Yeah, that's violent imagery. I didn't know this guy was such a pansy. What does Erica see in him?
That's toxic masculinity, I guess. Not the true
Thank you.
form of masculinity.
Thank you, because I sure as hell didn't learn this at church.
Yeah.
Now, this is the next part of his letter. Hang on a second here. I jumped ahead a bit. Here it is. This is his letter, and this is what I saw after I had done the research myself and found out that it was Chino Blanco and that he had done a retraction. Sure enough, less than 24 hours later, this is how I know it's less than 24 hours later. To this critic's credit, Chino Blanco, they owned their mistake and admitted none of the Gilbert goons are Mormon. And now he quotes the part that I had found on that particular post by Chino Blanco. And then he asked the question, why do false stories like the one above and many similar ones get so much attention? I don't know. Why is there air?
Yeah.
There are
I think
countless I'm sorry?
Well, I was just going to say, realistically, the answer to this question is they probably don't get more attention. Austin just notices them more because this is part of his community and part of his identity. So he sees those more. It's like if you get a new car, like if you get a new, whatever, very distinctive car, you get a new Volkswagen Beetle, you're going to notice every other Volkswagen Beetle on the road. That's just the way that it works
Yes.
because our brains work that way.
By the way, he's going to get into other things right now. So I just want to underscore the point that I made is that he himself recognized and admired and lauded Chino Blanco for within 24 hours after finding out he was wrong, posting a public correction, and they owned their mistake. Why can't you do the same thing, Austin? That's my question for you.
Can I also point out how crazy it is to compare a Reddit user, even a very prolific Reddit user like Chino Blanco, like when we're doing criticisms of things that the church has done or the church's leaders are done, he's comparing that. He's comparing like things we might quibble with that Dallin Oaks said versus something that was posted on Twitter. Like, can we talk about how unequal these comparisons are? It's like ridiculous that we even have to get to this place where he's comparing the most unhinged takes he's going to find on Reddit to an institution that has hundreds of billions of dollars. Like, this is just so absurd to even do that comparison in the first place.
That's an excellent point. We are holding Austin responsible for what leaders of his church have said. He's trying to hold us responsible for what everybody on the internet has said.
Right. Yes. Let
And
me
if we
go
were
ahead
doing
and
the
read.
same thing, we would take whack job things said by crazy ass Mormons and try and make Austin accountable for them.
Yeah, the trouble is that Austin's got quotes from Jonah Barnes in his book, so we're actually allowed to do that because he cited to one of those unhinged take Mormons. Let me go ahead and continue with the rest here. He
Captain
says,
Filtrum.
that's right. Together, they make the strongest apologist. There are countless examples of critics desperately trying to find systematic violence among the Latter-day Saints. Why are critics so eager to do so? I know we've
I'm
got
not
a
really that eager to.
right.
I'm the one who says over and over that, every religion has bad eggs, bad apples, and you're going to have bad things happening in every religion. I don't know that it's more among Mormons than other religion, but after having covered seemingly an endless supply of child molestation and child abuse cases happening within a Mormon context, which I seem to have been saddled with over at the newscast to cover those stories, I'm starting to think maybe there is a higher percentage in Mormonism.
Yeah, it's difficult to determine, but the
Mhm.
rate that we are seeing it, regardless of whether it's higher to some other religion or higher than public schools, doesn't matter. I mean, we talked about this when we had Elsie Walker, and we talked about abuse in the church generally. What level of abuse is acceptable to you, Austin? Because that's the way when you do this type of stuff, or what level of violence is acceptable to you. Because when you use these types of apologetics, that's what you're implicitly saying, is that there is some level you're okay with that shouldn't be criticized.
Mm.
Austin continues and he says, critics cannot accept or desperately try to cover up the reality that the Church of Jesus Christ of Latter day Saints helps bad people become good and good people become better. Question begged once again.
Yeah,
Critics
and
grab.
a quote from Joseph Smith not attributed. But does it really, by the way? Does it really? Is that the reality that the church univocally, uniformly helps bad people become good and good people become better? Because that would mean that there are no bad people in the church. All the bad people have become good, and the good people weren't bad to begin with, and they're better now. So who's molesting all the kids?
He then says critics grab onto anything that allows them to believe that the church is bad. In truth, okay, so remember, I'm going to remind people earlier, Austin had said that critics want the church, to be nothing more than a glorified self help seminar mixed with Jesus. And if people are looking at the screen, I put this down here at the bottom. Listen to these two sentences and how hilarious it is the way Austin describes his church. Remember, it was the critics, he said, that wanted church to be nothing more than a glorified self help seminar mixed with Jesus. Okay. In truth, every lesson, sacrament, sermon, and general conference talk points Latter day Saints to the Savior, except for all those ones that are really about Joseph Smith. Set that aside.
And
Every
tithing.
devotional, every devotional, fireside, and ordinance is intended to inspire the listener to improve themselves, their homes, their communities, and the world. So what do we have here? We have Austin Fife talking about how church is a place where people improve themselves because of the Savior. And yet he put, I love seeing you recognize this in real time. He put earlier into the voice of critics that they just want the church to be nothing more than a glorified self help seminar mixed with Jesus. And what did Austin describe church as? A glorified self help seminar with some Jesus. Pretty
Just
hilarious.
just to make sure everybody understands what you've got going on here, brilliant, by the way, is that very last 2 lines, and it ends with Jesus, right? That is the cut and paste from the place earlier in this letter that we read, and you said you got something coming on it, and this is where it happens.
Yep.
He actually does end up doing exactly what he claims the critics do, which is describing the church as nothing more than a glorified self-help seminar. Improvement mixed with Jesus. Yeah. Yeah, and they're trying to mix it with more and more Jesus every day
Mhm.
in Mormonism. That's brilliant. Absolutely brilliant. Not the most self-aware individual, Austin Fife. He goes on with his questions. Why would I listen? Well, he's not, because he stopped listening, remember, a long time ago?
He said so. He said so. He said he stopped listening. That's not just me making fun of him. He said that. He said that in his own book. It's amazing. Oh,
Why would I listen to critics who promote false narratives? Okay. I have no idea. If you label it false, which is something that's negative toward the church, then of course you're not going to listen to them. Why? Because this is how you deal with your cognitive dissonance, Austin,
Mhm.
by running away and putting your fingers in your ears and shouting, la, 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 la. Why would I listen to critics who promote false narratives if I'm trying to find more light and truth? That is, I don't know, that's like tautological, but it's not anchored to anything that's in the letter. Unfortunately, he says, we live in a fallen world, and some bad people are out there, and some of them are RFMs and other of them are randos. Sometimes those people are members of the Church of Jesus Christ of Latter-day Saints. However, common sense and evidence, which this chapter has been loaded with, indicate that the bad people in the church are bad in spite of the church. Holy shit. Hang on a second. You just said that the church makes bad people good and good people better, but now you're saying there's still bad people in the church. I mean, this is like on the same page.
Mhm.
Common sense and evidence indicate that the bad people in the church are bad in spite of the church's teachings, not because of it. So bad people are bad because they're doing what they're not doing what the church told them to do. And
Yeah.
that would be true for most religions. And it's true in most instances in Mormonism. However, there are a plethora of instances in Mormonism where people do bad things because they're told to do so by the church.
Right.
Roger Clark, the head of EPA, sacrificed his professional integrity because he was told to do so by the church. Over and over again, this happens. And that's, I don't know. I don't know other religions as well as I know Mormonism. So I can't really make a comparison, but the idea of having a living prophet on the earth today who speaks for and in behalf of God, I think leads to this kind of thing, more perhaps than in other churches that don't have that component.
Absolutely. And Mormonism incorporates divine command theory morality. And what I mean by that is in First Nephi, when Nephi kills Laban, he's constrained by the Spirit to do so. And that model of morality, which not all Christians share, by the way, and not all Mormons share also, I should say, but that theory of morality is what allows people to engage in that type of unethical behavior while still feeling like they're completely justified because their faith system literally teaches it at a foundational level. It's in the happiness letter. Whatsoever thing God will command is right, regardless of the circumstance, right? Is what Joseph Smith taught. That is the essence of divine command theory morality. And that belief, in my view, is incredibly dangerous. And we're going to talk about some of those cases where it's gone off the rails.
I think this is an interesting dichotomy in the church. It's certainly a huge dichotomy in the church and one that we don't have time to spend on today, but maybe in the future. Because on the one hand, it's very strong in Mormonism that God is bound by law, which itself is a radical idea, that God himself is bound by apparently a pre existing law, and he has to follow that law. And if he doesn't follow that law, then he's going to cease to be God because that's how he became God, was by following that law. So following the law is very important in Mormonism. There's even a passage in the Book of Mormon that says that if God should cease to be just, he would cease to be God. So it's very serious. On the other hand, and in complete contradiction to it, there's also this very strong thread in Mormonism that you have to do whatever God says for you to do simply because God says it, even if it contradicts the law. And that's that divine command theory you're talking about and the happiness letter. Yeah, you can have one, you could have the other. You're not supposed to have both together.
Yes, and I'm really glad you pointed that out because you're absolutely right. Like Mormon doctrine, and I don't mean that like Bruce Hartman Conkey's Mormon doctrine. I mean, you can find support in the correlated teachings of Mormonism for both non-divine command theory morality and divine command theory morality. You can find them both coming from Joseph Smith, which is a problem because that violates the law of non-contradiction. You can't have two opposing models of morality. Anyways, I agree. That would be a future discussion topic that would
Thank
be
you.
interesting to do.
Yeah, this is literally X and not X. that are both coming out from Joseph Smith. And one gets the idea that he starts with X, but not X is there for when it is that he wants to do things and have God's backing, even though they contradict the law that God already gave, and even the laws that Joseph Smith gave on behalf of God. That's what makes it so interesting. Oh, this is a slide I put together, right? And it was based upon what it was he said here about bad people in the church are bad in spite of the church's teachings, not because of it. Well, actually, some people are bad because of the church's teachings. And here's a rogues gallery of some of them. There's Chad Daybell up there. He's been convicted and sentenced to death. And boy, that can't happen soon enough as far as I'm concerned. Yeah, I want to see a dangling Chad. There's Lori Daybell. No, she wasn't made bad by the church's teachings. See, the problem is they took the church's teachings too seriously. That's what made them bad. Or at least that's what they used as an excuse for their badness. I don't want to get into that whole argument. I'm just pointing out there are a number of exceptions to what it is that Austin is peddling. Over here, bottom left, the Lafferty brothers. On the right, you've got Ruby, Frankie. You got Jody Hildebrand. This is an ancient history for you. Is it, Austin? You know about these people, right? By the way, and these are not just Mormons who did bad things. These are Mormons who did bad things in the name of the teachings of Mormonism.
Yeah, just ask them. Ask Lori Vallow. Lori Vallow, because this happened local to me. I actually know the district court clerk that worked on this case. She had to legitimately take a several-year break after the case was concluded from the practice of law because it was so traumatizing for her. But Lori Vallow did an interview just earlier. It might have been late last year or earlier this year about how she truly believes that Jesus is going to come back and free her and that she's been unjustly persecuted because she didn't do anything wrong. So my point is, if what Austin is saying is true and these people were bad in spite of Mormonism's teachings, then why don't they say that? They don't. They think that they're the true version of Mormonism.
Back in 2004, I think it was the 20th anniversary of the murders, the Lafferty murders. One of them was interviewed in prison, and I got the recording from a listener who happened to have put a cassette tape into the machine when the radio was playing it back in 2004. Could have been 1994. It was an anniversary date, but I think it was 2004. And this guy was totally convinced that Elijah was going to come and bust him out of Point of the Mountain. I don't know if he still is that confident that that's going to happen, but that's what he was saying back a number of decades ago. Oh, no, was it the Savior? No, he was Elijah. I'm sorry. It's been a long time since I listened to that. No, he is Elijah, and Jesus is going to bust him out. Something like that.
I added this. This is not as extreme as the examples that you had from before, but this is an interview between the current prophet president of the church, Dallin Oaks, and the church's public affairs department in 2006. You can find this still on the church's page dealing with same-sex attraction and how to handle same-sex attraction. And again, I'm not saying this is anywhere near the severity, but I'm just saying this is an individual who, when we read this answer, he's directly taking this out of Mormonism, and now he's the spokesman and figurehead for Mormonism. So not murder, not a murderer, but this does not match to me what a moral person would say. So the question from the public affairs person to President Oaks was, at what point does showing that love cross the line into inadvertently endorsing behavior? If our son says, well, if you love me, can I bring my partner to our home to visit? Can we come for holidays? How do you balance that against, for example, concern for other children in the home? This is what Elder Oaks said. He said, that is a decision that needs to be made individually and by the person responsible. Yet he's still going to tell you what he would do, which the implicit thing there is, and that's what you should do. Calling upon the Lord for inspiration. I can imagine that in most circumstances, the parents would say, please don't do that. Don't put us into that position. Surely, if there are children in the home who would be influenced by this example, the answer would likely be that there would also be other factors that would make that the likely answer.
By the way, notice that even from Elder Oaks, this is 2006, but it's not the Dark Ages. It's 19 years ago.
Exactly.
He is talking from the place that still believes that homosexuality is a choice. Otherwise, he would not have any concern about other children in the home being influenced by that example.
Very good point. He continues and says, I can also imagine some circumstances in which it might be possible to say, yes, come, but don't expect to stay overnight. Don't expect to be a lengthy house guest. Don't expect us to take you out and introduce us to our friends or to
By the way,
deal
this
with
is the liberal version of Elder Oaks. This is the liberal version of what he can imagine Mormon parents saying to their gay son.
Right. This is the kind version of Elder Oaks. Yeah. Don't expect us to take you out and introduce you to our friends or to deal with you in a public situation that would imply our approval of your partnership, in scare quotes. There are so many different circumstances, it's impossible to give one answer that fits all. I I just have to say, my belief in church leaders and even my belief in God was severely affected by becoming a parent. And what I mean by that is I would never say this to my child ever, regardless of what they had done. My child could be one of those people who's taken someone else's life, and I would not say this to them. What Elder Oaks is saying about being homosexual. Don't expect to stay overnight. There's no condition on my love for my children. Do I want certain things for their life? Of course I do. Do I hold standards, Austin? Of course I do. But love transcends those things. You're there for the people that need you, that are part of your little tribe. And Elder Oaks doesn't see it that way. His dedication, first and foremost, is to this whatever, his bigotry, his homophobia, whatever you want to call it. That's what he's primarily converted to. This idea.
His reputation and that of the church is, I think, what is he wants to protect.
Yes.
Yeah. President Oaks, when you can understand why this is wrong and when you can understand what it is that Kolby just said about loving his children regardless, then you will understand Paul's dark statement, dark to you, that charity is the greatest of all these.
So this is another example, not as extreme as we talked about with the Valos and Chad Daybell, but this is an example of someone who is, I would say, saying horrible things in the name of Mormonism. It is his Mormonism that drives him to say these things. He's not doing them in spite of his Mormonism. He's doing them because of his Mormonism. And I think I wanted to explain this a little bit further, even though you've already explained it well on the next slide. Let me see if I added that.
And this is in 2006, but it is currently up on the church's website for all to read. It remains current in that sense.
Yep, I literally pulled it last night. What I was going to explain is
TMI there, Kolby. TMI.
What I was going to explain about the connection to Mormonism here is people need to understand the difference between necessary and sufficient conditions to really understand what we're saying here. And that's that a necessary condition is something that must be present for an outcome to occur, but does not by itself cause the outcome. So fire is the result of two necessary conditions. Fuel and oxygen are necessary to make fire, right? You need both of them to have fire, but neither one on their own are going to give you fire. If a necessary condition is absent, the outcome cannot happen, but its presence alone is not enough to guarantee it. A sufficient condition, in contrast, is something that, if it is present, guarantees the outcome. It may not be the only way that outcome can occur, but whenever it occurs, the outcome will follow. Many outcomes require multiple necessary conditions acting together and only become possible, not inevitable, when those conditions emerge. And then I want to apply that directly to Lori Vallow to really drive this point home on the next slide. Mormonism was not a sufficient condition for Lori Vallow's murders. It wasn't on its own the cause of those murders. There are millions of Latter-day Saints who hold similar beliefs and never commit violence, as you already said. So the doctrine itself does not compel or predict someone being a murderer. However, Mormonism did function as a necessary condition in her specific case because it supplied the theological framework that Lori and Chad used to rationalize their actions. Continuing revelation, prophetic authority or adjacent to prophetic authority, spiritual warfare, possession by dark spirits, and these exaltations, eschatological narratives. Without that framework, this particular justification for those murders would not have existed. JJ and Tylee would still be alive without Mormonism. The crimes required many conditions: mental illness, charismatic co radicalization, isolation, moral disengagement. But the LDS belief system provided the symbolic language that made the violence intelligible to them.
You know, and lots of people could do this in lots of different religions, but damn it, it's the Book of Mormon that has the story of God commanding Nephi, the hero prophet of the narrative, to slay a drunk and unconscious man in the street in order to steal his property from him. And that was brought up in the trial with Lori Vallow or Chad Daybell.
Yes. They
It was brought up
literally
in the
went.
trial by the prosecutor, I think, because she was mentioning it because she was summarizing the evidence that she was going to be admitting and letting the jury understand the context of why it was that they're talking about Nephi. Okay. It's your Nephi moment. Now we're to worldview. And I think this is the last section in this chapter of the letter. For years, Austin says, for years, I wondered. He worked so hard. He wondered for years. For years, I wondered how people who were part of the same church and listening to the same messages could have radically different interpretations. I'm not sure what he means by radically different interpretations. Is he talking about Lori Vallow?
Yeah, I think it's just wild to see a grown man openly tell you he can't understand that other people have different opinions than him. That's really what he's saying.
Hmm.
He doesn't understand how people can connect with different parts of a narrative. That's just like being an adult. That's the thing that's hilarious too about Elder Oak's statement, like that other children in the homes are going to be affected. Like you can just explain to people or you can explain to your friends that there are people who live different lives than you, that have different opinions than you,
Mhm.
and that love requires you to treat them that like your beliefs bind you. Your beliefs don't bind other people. This is just so weird to have an adult that doesn't understand people can see things differently than that. That's really what he's saying. How could people see the world differently than me? Well, again, Austin, credulity is not a virtue.
But naivete is. I'm going to read this example that he got from some BYU professor at some fair Mormon talk is not that amazing to me. Austin says he was profoundly impacted, and I want to get through this and get your thoughts about it. He spends a lot of time on it, too much, I think. I don't think it's worth the time he spends, but maybe he does because it was impactful to him. It's basically saying that people who are Mormons have a different framework that they're going to understand information than people who are not Mormons.
Yeah.
I think that is so obvious as to not require argument. But this is what he says. BYU Idaho professor of psychology, Jeffrey Thane, gave a fair Latter-day Saint conference speech in 2021 titled Worldview Apologetics, Revealing the Waters in Which We Swim. So much of what I see in the church and from detractors of the church finally made sense to me when I saw and pondered the message of the video of this speech. To watch the original video, see it below. We're going to skip that part. But he goes on beneath it where it says, Thane, that's the professor, Thane gives a hypothetical example. Oh, good. A hypothetical example. We don't get enough of those in the church. Of two members of the church, James and Greg, both declared that the 1995, the Family, a Proclamation to the World, is doctrinal. James believes that cultural norms and policies that encourage chastity are natural expressions of the proclamation on the family. So he's a good guy. He's the
I
Mormon guy.
like I just have to remark on the dog whistle here. Policies that encourage chastity are natural expressions of the proclamation on the family. Just come out and say what you really want to say, Austin. Say what the way that people are going to hear it. And exactly, we know what you're talking about. It's the homophobia and the bigotry. That's what it is. Just come out and say it with your full chest. But you know that you don't want to come out and say it because of how it makes you look. So instead, you have to equivocate and use a term like encourage chastity. As far as I understand, the law of chastity commands you to have no sexual relations except with your lawfully wedded spouse. What do you do with that when people of the same gender can be married to each other? There is no inherent violation of the law of chastity in that relationship. Instead, they have to pretend like there is so that they don't look like bigots. And that's exactly what Austin's doing here, apparently
Yeah.
borrowing from a BYU Idaho professor.
Yeah, I think the apologetic line is that we're not asking homosexual members of the church to follow any law that we don't expect the heterosexual members of the church to follow, which is no sexual intercourse before marriage.
Right.
Except that
And
we
just
don't recognize gay marriages, so you can't do it there either.
Yeah, exactly. To show that I'm not just reading that into it, his last sentence, Greg believes those same, so this is the different guy. Greg believes those same norms and policies regarding chastity stifle self expression and burden LGBT identified individuals. So there it is. That's what he's
Mhm.
really talking about.
Yes. And here they are. There's James and there's Greg. The twist is that James has the longer hair, but he's the faithful Mormon.
I noticed that too.
You didn't see that coming, did you? No, Greg has the short hair, but he's the guy who's the bad boy. How? How? Austin asks, how can two members of the same church who believe the same document is doctrinal come to differing conclusions? It all comes down to worldview. Jeffrey says, that's still the professor, Jeffrey Thane, I think.
Mm-hmm.
A worldview is a set of values and assumptions about the world through which we interpret our experiences. More specifically, worldviews shape our understanding of what human flourishing and the good life looks like. The story we tell ourselves informs how we see the world, or rather, it is the waters we swim in, or maybe it is the water we swim in, striving for grammatical correctness with this professor from Idaho. Thane then goes on to explain the two prominent worldviews out of many that influence members of the church: the gospel worldview story, that's the Mormon plan of salvation, and the expressive individualistic worldview / story, that's people who want to be authentic. Both worldviews have: 1, a central problem or conflict; 2, character aspirations; 3, expected resolution; and 4, definition of human flourishing and the good life; and 5, villains. I bet I know where we fit in that one. Oh, and this reminded me of this quote from Egyptologist Carrie Muhlestein. I'm going to read this, and hopefully you'll be able to tell me why it is that this quote made me think of what it was that was being written about by Austin Fife. Here's an Egyptologist talking publicly, and it got recorded. I start out with an assumption that the Book of Abraham and the Book of Mormon and anything else we get from the restored gospel is true. Therefore, any evidence I find, I will try and fit into that paradigm. What is it about what Austin wrote there that made me think of that? I hope you know, because I've forgotten.
Well, I'm looking up the back half of that quote because it's actually a 2-sentence quote, and I know exactly why you thought of it. He says, so he continues and says, there are those who will assume that it is not true, and on these points we will just have to agree to disagree. So what he's saying and what Jeff Thane is doing here with this nonsensical idea, I guess this is
It's
what
coming back
passes
to me
for
now. Thank you. Go ahead.
Yeah, this is what passes for being a professor at BYU Idaho. Harvard of the West,
Mhm.
it is not. Um,
The real professors are at BYU, Utah. We all know that.
yeah, what they're doing here rhetorically is they're trying to say to people like Austin, if anybody disagrees with you, it's because they are disagreeing with you as a result of the way they've been raised in their worldview. Basically, they're just immediately discounting your worldview or any evidence that would disconfirm their worldview and support yours. And so they're making every single disagreement, every single criticism just as a result of worldviews, a result of bias. That's what
Mhm.
Carrie Muhlestein is doing. And it's bullshit. And let me tell you why. Because I exist. I was raised in the church and had the exact same worldview as people like Austin and people like Carrie. And that worldview ended up leading me out of the church.
This is another way that apologists have come up with to try and deal with objections and evidence against the church. And once again, the attempt is to come up with a model that does not deal with the evidence.
Mm-hmm.
And that's what this is. So you notice there's no dealing with any evidence here. What it's saying is that the people who see the evidence as supporting Mormonism do that simply because they're Mormon. And the people who see the evidence as not supporting Mormonism do it simply because they're not Mormon.
Mm-hmm.
And they have a different worldview. What this does, I think, from a legal perspective, is it completely gets rid of the reasonable man concept.
Right.
And the reasonable man concept in law is very simple. It's just that if you look at these pieces of evidence, if there's a certain proposition, it could be an allegation or a complaint, right? But on this proposition, here's the evidence that's presented. And from that evidence, would a reasonable person, we used to call it a reasonable man, would a reasonable person find that the evidence had proven to them beyond that certain legal standard, criminal trial beyond a reasonable doubt, of the truth of the proposition or the allegation? In other words, that he committed the crime or she committed the crime. That's where the reasonable person standard comes in. And what this does is it tries to get rid of it and say everybody's reasonable. They're just looking at things differently because of their backgrounds, and
Mm-hmm.
evidence really doesn't have to be addressed at all. That's what I see him doing.
Yep.
Would you like me to go to the next slide?
It's a wood tool. It is an apologetic. By the way, I'm mentioning this only because this is an apologetic that would literally work for any faith system or for defending anything that can't be justified. And because of that, it should be used to defend absolutely nothing. Any apologetic that can work equally for Mormonism or Catholicism or Buddhism or whatever supernatural belief that you have is absolutely worthless to get you to truth if it can be used that widely.
Just substitute the Buddhist worldview in his first example. It's always against the expressive individualistic worldview, but Buddhist, Luther, anything can put in there and it will still serve as an argument. And that's because it's not a valid argument.
It's hilarious to me that this is what passes for scholarship from a professor at BYU Idaho. Truly it is. That's hilarious.
Oh, yeah. There's Kerry Muhlestein. He's showing up everywhere with Cardin Ellis. Cardin Ellis thinks that Kerry Muhlestein is brilliant.
On Cardin's Mount Rushmore, there's Jacob Hansen, Kerry Muhlestein, and Jonah Barnes. Those real hard-hitting scholars.
Cardin Ellis reminds me of that joke about dogs that you can say anything you want to a dog, and they're still going to look at you as if that's the most brilliant thing they've ever heard. That's Cardin Ellis. So here's the gospel worldview story. I'm not going to go through all these pieces again. He replicates this in his letter. He is so taken with this. He thinks this is the key to defending the church and understanding why it is that what the critics say doesn't actually have to be engaged with at all. Even though he seems to have spent a number of chapters attempting to do just that prior to this, 16 chapters, in fact. Here's the expressive individualistic worldview / story. And then he says, the two visuals presented by Thane helped me completely change the way I see the world. They gave me compassion for those who oppose the church. Not enough compassion to talk to them or treat them with dignity. Depending on how I define the villain of the worldview story, I could easily have become hostile to the church as well. Depending on our worldview, here's how the story plays out. So it's just our worldview. It has nothing to do with the evidence or the reasonable person or burdens of proof. And there it is in diagram form. Isn't that inspiring? That's what I thought too.
He's just viewing everything as, and this just goes back to what I said. He's viewing everything as motivated purely by bias because both systems he's created are a circle.
Yeah. Well, that's appropriate since a lot of it is circular reasoning.
Right. So if you disagree with him, it's the result of circular reasoning. That's what he's telling himself. This is like the biggest meta straw man Austin has done in his entire book. He's saying, if anybody disagrees with me, it's just as a result of their worldview.
I think maybe this is why he wrote this chapter, so he could include this piece in here from the BYU Idaho professor, given the fact he's proclaimed how moved he is by it and how much time and space he's spending on it.
Yeah. Do you want
He
me to read this
continued. Yeah,
slide?
would you?
Yep. In my mind, the gospel story is much more compelling. I see more positive fruits from the gospel story than the widespread expressive individualist story in the culture.
What
People
does that
today are
even mean? What does that even mean? I see more positive fruits from the gospel story than the widespread expressive individualistic story in the culture. What positive fruits are you even talking about? He is slapdashing this thing together. As bad
yeah.
as everything else is, he's phoning this one in from Mars.
Mhm. Mhm.
I interrupted. Please continue.
No, that's okay. People today are more depressed, lonelier, and less religious than ever.
So they must all go together. People are more depressed and lonelier because they're less religious.
Mhm. It's just wild to me that an adult wrote this. I believe that a restoration to Christ as the central hero of our story is the only way to true societal healing. See, that too is another thing. It's like, so when more people proportionally believed in Christ than ever before, say the Middle Ages,
Mm.
if that is in Austin's mind, if restoration to Jesus Christ as the central hero is the way to true societal healing, he must have loved the Middle Ages. That must have been the prime time of life to live. I don't know about you, but I don't necessarily want to live during the Inquisition or the Middle Ages.
Those were the days.
Isn't that implicit in what he's saying here?
Yes. And the other thing that's implicit is once again, he's saying if only everybody in the world were Mormon, then we'd all get along. I believe that a restoration to Christ, restoration, this is the Mormon Jesus, guys. We all know this. A restoration to Christ as the central hero of our story is, which means President Oaks, of our story is the only way to true, no true Scotsman fallacy again, true societal healing can only come through that. So if everybody converts to Mormonism, we'll all get along fine. He's just saying the same thing in a different way. He asks the question, wouldn't a worldview that focuses more on the gratification of my immediate wants hurt my family and community? I don't know. How many meals a day do you eat, Austin? Is this universal? I ask about meals because gratification of immediate wants, hunger is one of those. And generally, we gratify those pretty regularly in the United States. We're very blessed, if I can use that word, with abundance of stuff. And we don't tend to have to go hungry very much. And I don't think Austin has missed a lot of meals. He says, wouldn't a worldview that focuses more on the gratification of my immediate wants hurt my family and community? No, having dinner is not hurting your family and community. Some would, but you are treating it like it's a universal truth when it's obviously not. The gratification of some immediate wants is a good thing. Breathing comes to mind. Wouldn't focusing on short term, immediate pleasures make me less happy in the long run? I don't know. That sounds like something that a person could have a discussion about. But unfortunately, you don't engage in the discussion.
Right. And this is just where it comes back to straw manning the actual critical position. If you don't hold Austin's opinion, then you must just hold this nihilistic, hedonistic, I'm just going to chase nothing but immediate short term pleasures worldview. And that's just nonsensical. I know that I don't live my life that way. I know that you don't live that life, that live your life that way. There are no serious critics of the church that I have spoken to that live their life this way. But it sure is comforting for Austin to think that that's the way that everybody else is living their lives. And that's primarily why this chapter was written. That's why he tells this worldview story, is because if he can if he can get you to buy this nonsense, then he can get you to write off any criticism of the church as being nothing more than the result of bias against the church. But again, what do you do with that, Austin, with people like RFM who spent decades in the church, who may or may not have had his second anointing, who, or someone like me who was raised in the church, who worked for BYU's ancient scripture department, that served faithfully in the church, served a mission, taught at the MTC, and that path led me out of the church? What do you do with someone like Dan Vogel, who studied church history so much while he was in the church that it led him out of the church? there are huge disqualifying pieces of evidence or disconfirming pieces of evidence that we could look at in people's journey that Austin doesn't validate, makes no room for, because it makes him uncomfortable. This is where we come back to that image of him plugging his ears and comforting himself rather than deal with his cognitive dissonance.
Boom, baby.
That was
That's what I was looking
well.
for. That's what I was looking for. This is how he deals with them. And by the way, after having painted the people who just want to live their own lives and be themselves in such a negative way that they are just people who want to go out and have fun and do immediate gratification and all that other nasty stuff. After painting them in such a negative way, he feels now he can ask the question triumphantly, wouldn't my family and I be much better off with the gospel story, which means Mormonism? Wouldn't my family and I be much better off with Mormonism after I have described everybody else who's not a Mormon in such a horrible way?
Right. Mm-hmm.
He goes on, I can imagine how miserable Kolby and RFM are. This is what he's saying. I can imagine how miserable I would be if I only sought relationships with people who had no expectations of me. What does that mean? I don't even know what that means at this point, except obviously he's talking about the church, and the church has a lot of expectations for you. He'd be miserable if he hung out with people who accepted him as he is. You see, this is the mind F that Mormonism does to people. He does not realize, like you and I do, because we're on this side. He does not realize that if he hung out with people who just accepted him as he is, I mean, I'm not talking about being okay with horrible things, right? But just being okay with a person the way they are. They got good things, they got bad things. That's okay. They're a person. I got good things and bad things too. He has no idea of how happy he would be to hang out with people who just accept him as he is. And yet the church has him thinking he would be miserable in that company.
Yes, and it also, the way he's describing this just also demonstrates how infantilized his thinking has become as a result of Mormonism. And what I mean by that is, rather than recognize the church's system for what it is, and I'll talk about that in just a second, he has to pivot to the exact opposite extreme and say that if you're not willing to live inside the church's system, that you're only seeking out relationships with people who have no expectations of you. Like, you can have no expectations on you at all if you're not willing to submit to the church's system. So let's talk about the reality of what the church's system is. Mosiah 3:19 tells you that you are to submit to all things that the Lord seeth fit to inflict upon you, even as a child to submit to his father. Coming back to a similar sentiment I expressed in response to Elder Oak's comments, I do not expect my children to submit to anything I see fit to inflict upon them simply because I'm their father. And it's ironic, I guess, to me now, as I've been thinking more about that model of God, that Mormonism's insistence on this model of God, that God is our heavenly father, that he cares about us like a father, which is also clearly taught in the New Testament, right? It's taught in the Sermon on the Mount. Jesus uses that example. I always state it that way to make clear that this isn't a false analogy or that it's a fair comparison, because if it's good enough for Jesus, it's good enough for me. But this idea that unless you're willing to submit totally to what God wants you to do just because he wants you to do it, that all you're then asking for is this hedonistic life where there are no expectations on you. It just demonstrates this binary black and white thinking that isn't reality. People don't think that way, Austin. Just because you're not willing to totally submit yourself to anything God sees fit to inflict upon you doesn't mean that you think there should be no expectations on you or no standard or no idea of covenants and commitment. I don't know who sold you this lie. Well, actually, I do. Jeff Thane apparently sold you this lie. But that isn't the way that the actual critics that you've written this entire book about think. And you have two critics telling you that. So let's see if you live up to your admiration of Chino Blanco and own the mistake, own the obvious errors replete throughout this chapter. At a foundational level, the premise of this chapter is broken and flawed. That's why we started with it's fractally wrong.
Or at least you could come on the show and talk to us about it. But no, you've cut us out of your life. You won't have anything to do with us. Which brings us to your next sentence. I see a shallow life. In other words, if he weren't a Mormon, I see a shallow life where I cut out of my life everyone else who does not affirm me because they are toxic. He's trying to lambaste us, imagining that is our worldview when actually it's his and many other Mormons. They lead a shallow life where they cut that's subjective. You can leave that out, okay? I see a life where I cut out of my life everyone else who does not affirm me because they are toxic. How many Mormons do you know who fit that description? Not rhetorical.
Yeah, I have family members that will not associate with me because of the way my wife and I feel about the church. Period.
Yeah.
I mean, yeah, the same exact thing happens.
So, Austin, sounds like we're rubber and you're glue. Whatever you say bounces off us and sticks to you. He says, I can imagine it because those are the cultural waters we swim in. Pardon the dangling participle. I can imagine it because those are the cultural waters we swim in. Oh my gosh.
In
How
which
about
we swim.
imagining it because that's what you do yourself?
In which we swim, Austin. There you go.
There we go. Hey, guess what? That's it. That is the end of this chapter. Oh, I'm so happy.
I actually have one thing to add. Can you reload the slides real quick?
I'm even more happy. So hang on a second here. What I'm going to do is I'm going to reload the slides. Oh my gosh. Remove from studio. So if I took him out of the studio, which I just did, now I'm going to try and reload these suckers. And we'll see. Because you added something while we were talking. Is that it?
Yes, I had a lovely assistant that drew up a, well, I shouldn't say assistant. Sorry. I had someone who wanted to draw up a version of all the criticisms. No, let me say it this way. I had someone draw up an image of all of the criticisms that this supposed critic that Austin is talking to throughout this chapter, all these criticisms amalgamated together in one person. Are you able to see that image? And then I have someone who wants to talk about that for a second.
Wow, really?
I
Is
do.
this a lovely person?
Lovelier than me.
We
Although
always
she's not
have
wearing
room on the
that.
show for lovely people. Now, hang on a
Okay.
second here. Is this at the end of the slides? I'm going through them at the bottom. Oh, hang on. I think I saw something. Is this it?
That's it.
What on
Okay.
earth is this?
I'm going to turn the mic over to the better Reddish.
Hi, RFM.
Hi, Cammie. You're looking lovely
Okay.
this morning.
Oh, thank you. So I drew this as Kolby and I were chatting last night. I was just doodling on my iPad, and I thought, I am just going to take all of the things that he said and make the image of the critic that Austin obviously has inside of his head. Like he imagines this person, I guess, who thinks these things. I just switched the words in the sentence to make it coming from the critic, but he imagines somebody who says something like, they need to separate and isolate themselves. I'm so eager to find systematic violence in the church, or I really enjoy criticizing you. Like this person that he's describing, like this is a character. This is not a real person. He's so dissociated from the reality of the situation because he's in defense mode that he just creates this silly little character that says stuff like, how dare you group together? It makes you so strong. I hate that. Or you having standards makes me feel bad. Like he's imagining someone who's saying that because Austin has standards that the church gives him. The critics just feel bad about it and they just hate covenants and standards so much. Or they hate watch the content, but also wish that they would just stay silent. And they distrust the church just because it's trendy. Like it's really silly to think about this person that Austin has in his head. That's the bad guy. They're up against this horrible critic that is feeling and thinking all of these things, when in reality, if he would just let his guard down and look at this real person is just saying, I wish the church didn't lie to me about these things. I'm really confused about how I found out through the Joseph Smith papers or through documents or letters that Joseph wrote himself that the church didn't tell me the reality of the doctrine. They didn't tell me that they were teaching these things as doctrine about like blacks in the priesthood or whatever thing you want to dive into. It was so silly to me. And so this is just a visual of Austin telling somebody about his idea of what a critic is. And when you look at it that way, it just seems a little bit silly to think about a real person that thinks and believes all of those things.
This is a great, great graphic that you came up with. I love it. And that is the person that he has created as the critic and wants to pawn off on his audience as you and me and Kolby. Cammy, why do you think Austin does this?
Well, I think it's because he's indoctrinated. I almost feel bad for Austin. I mean, he really shouldn't have written a book because he should have expected some people to read it, especially if it was written to the critics.
I know when I write books, I don't expect anyone to read them.
Yeah, I mean,
I'm very upset when they do.
It is just an odd experience to read the things that Austin wrote, because it does seem like he's just kind of sitting down having a family conversation about all the things he's frustrated about. But he thinks this way and he feels this way because of what he was taught, and he's very attached to the feelings that he's had about the Book of Mormon and the gospel and growing up in it. And the world is kind of scary right now, and it takes a lot of effort to understand what's really going on. And when you don't have that bandwidth to go out and really assess things in reality for yourself, you're going to hang on to what you were taught and what you've been conditioned to believe about the world. And so it's not surprising that he feels this way, but we've come, like, it's been too long now. He needs to wake up and look around and kind of realize that this just sounds really silly. And he may want to actually go and talk to these people, like really engage with, not cherry pick Reddit posts and things like that he wants to say, well, they got this wrong or they said this wrong. That's because people are people. But these people have some really like real concerns that he says he's addressing in this book and that he doesn't address in this book at all, because he's convinced that he's right about everything.
It occurs to me that he quote mines so much, even in contravention of his own rules, but he quote mines so much to give the illusion that he is interacting with critics when actually he's not. He's in his bunker with the doors bolted.
Yeah, he's talking about critics, and critics are this character to him. That's why it sounds so silly when he does it, because he's created this character in his mind, and then he goes into every conversation or every chapter with the assumption that this character is out to get the church and has bad intentions and thinks things like this graphic shows, which I've never met an actual critic of the church or somebody who is speaking out against the harm or whatever it is that thinks these things. But this is what he says. I just switched his sentences around from this chapter, which was so silly to just read. It's just like this dump of like, these bad guys are coming after us, and don't we have it better? Don't we have the best way to teach these things? But I also understand where he's coming from, because my goal as a Mormon mother in the church was to raise my kids to think that this was okay. Like, I was trying to find the best way to explain to them how this is kind of just the way it is. We live in this kind of crazy world, and I'm going to raise you to be strong in the gospel and to go on your mission and to serve the Lord, because that's all the attachments I had to good things were those things, to go and serve and love, and serving and loving are good things. But it sounds almost hard for me to reflect on that today. And the fact that I was treating that like a vaccine or something. I want my kids to go to the doctor, and if they have to get a shot or if they have to go get x-rays or something that's going to be hard for them, I prepare them. I'm like, this is just how it is. I can't take this hurt or pain away from you, but I'm going to help you go through it. But the church adds a whole bunch of stuff to that list of things that we're just supposed to go through. You're going to have to leave your family when you're 18 and go serve a mission for 2 years. That terrified me as a mom to think about raising my kids and preparing them to go and do that for the church. But I was planning to do that because I was just going to tell them, hey, this is the way it is. And so I'm just going to help you face what you're supposed to do. But all of that conversation in my mind happens inside of Mormonism. I never went outside and thought about it from a different perspective. So I couldn't see. And Austin claims to have thought about it from a different perspective, but it's very obvious that he hasn't actually done that. And I hope that one day he does. But then again, it takes a lot of work. And when you are a father and you have a job and little kids, that's hard to do. I mean, he
And
found
no
some time to write
bandwidth.
this book, but
And no bandwidth.
yeah,
This
and
is the
it's
best
hard.
thing
We
that
have
I've
to have
heard you say so
compassion
far. I
for him.
wrote it down. I think you've managed to give Austin Fife a new nickname. It is No Bandwidth Fife. He just doesn't
Yeah.
have the bandwidth to go out there and figure out what the truth is. I think you may be
Well,
right about that.
Could if he would stop putting his effort into writing apologetics. He might be able to find some resources there to consider, the critic's point of view.
You know, it once occurred to me that an apologist, what they're doing quite literally is they're in a fort and they're defending the fort against armies that they see as trying to invade the fort and overrun them. And they're running from tower to tower. They're trying to make sure they have all their ammunition. They're firing off a shot from their cannons every now and again. But the very nature of the game is that because you're defending a fort, you have trapped yourself inside the fort. You can't get out of the fort. But when you realize finally, like I did, that those armies aren't really enemies, they're just people out picnicking. And I leave the fort and I start walking around. It's a really beautiful world out there.
Yeah. Yeah. And we don't want to fight. Like, we don't want to fight with Austin. Like, the thing is, like, he's just lying all the time. And so we kind of have to point it out. But like, we would actually have a conversation. Like, if I've wondered if I should maybe reach out to Tikla and be like, hey girl, are you okay? Like, do you need, like, blink twice if you need some help or if you want a different perspective on this, because you can just get so caught up and the effort is so real. I believe with all my heart that Austin and I don't know, ward radio people, they really probably do have very difficult feelings that they're dealing with, because they really do believe that these people are after them and trying to tear down their faith and take something from them. But we don't need to take anything from them. We're just trying to point out reality. And at this point, it's getting dangerous to not point it out, because there's real stuff going on. And we kind of need good people to help out with that. And I think underneath all of this, all of the indoctrination that they have going on, like, they're good people. Most Mormons are very good people. I know so many of them. They want to be good. They
Would
just
you
need a
include
different
Jacob
system.
Hansen in that?
Yeah, that's a different story. I don't know how to process Jacob Hansen. I think I think that he got caught up in this fame and this rage bait, like, place that he's in, where he just kind of likes that experience. And yeah, that's difficult. Maybe one day. Maybe one
So
day.
he's not a nice guy.
I don't see it.
No, I don't either.
But I believe he thinks he's a nice guy.
Well, I think we're all the hero of our own story.
Yeah. I mean, as we should be. We should have respect for the way that we act in the world, because that means you're thinking about how you act in the world. I think that, yeah. I think that some Mormons, like Jacob Hansen, he has this character of who he is too, and he's playing a role. And in his mind, that character is good, but it's not looking good from the outside. I just don't think he sees it.
Okay, so one final question, Cammie. Have you at this point forgiven Kolby for giving away the fact that there's mirrors on the ceiling of your bedroom?
I mean, there's nothing I can really do about it.
Now he told us that those things on the wall are mirrors too.
There are a good amount of mirrors in our room. We like mirrors.
You guys really hate vampires.
Yes, that might be a good way to explain it.
I think that's the reason for the mirrors.
We don't want those vampires in our room. So, yeah.
Well, thank you so much for joining us.
Hop on for a minute. I'm going to give it back to Kolby.
Yes, I hope that wasn't awkward there at the end, but thank you so much for joining us.
Of course. See ya.
Bye-bye. Well, that was an unexpected surprise.
For me too.
You couldn't hear what I was asking, what we were talking about, could you?
I could.
I thought I was hearing noises in the background from time to time.
I did giggle a little bit hearing Cammie be questioned about Jacob Hansen.
Yeah, that's a different matter. He is his own category. Oh, well, Kolby, we're about done here for this chapter. Now, tell the good folks how many more chapters we have left, since you know better than I.
Yep. No, I'm happy to. So we're going to do prophets and ongoing restoration next. I think probably next week. At least I'm good for next week. And then we can do our last episode where we will talk about Austin's thoughts on general belief in God and atheism, theism concepts, and then we'll roll his conclusion into it. For the Prophets and Ongoing Restoration, I definitely want to talk a little bit about the Lowry-Nelson exchange, because I think it basically blows a hole in believing the prophets are anything more than what those letters show. And when we talk about the general belief in God stuff, I'd like to talk about the problem of evil, suffering, and the problem of I'm trying to think of how to say it. The problem
Evil?
of non-resistant non-belief.
Oh,
Non-resistant non-belief.
okay. Well, I'll be interested in hearing about that. I also want to do an episode after that, okay? Where a neutral and detached computer compares Austin Fife's letter with our analysis of it and who came out victorious.
We can do that.
Good. I hope it's a neutral and detached computer, because I wouldn't want it favoring us or anything.
Yeah, we can use a new bot.
Very good. All right. Well, Kolby, thank you so much for joining me. Is Cammie still around?
Nope.
Okay. Well, would you let her know for me and everybody else? It was great
She's
seeing
making
her.
donuts. She's making donuts for me to enjoy after the podcast is over. If you know, you know.
Really?
No, she's not.
I was really hoping to, because there's nothing better than a warm donut.
Thanks for having me, RFM. Great fun again.
At least that's what I've heard.
Terrible, terrible, terrible book.
Yes, this is the not good, very, very bad book that was written by Austin Fife. But we're almost done with it, so they can no longer complain that we haven't read everything in it as part of their argument as to why it is that we should not be listened to in our opinion about the book. Everybody, thanks so much for watching. Please hit like, please hit subscribe. We're trying to get a bunch of subscribers so that we can compete with Psych Word Radio and those guys who, believe it or not, have more subscribers. I think that's crazy. Please hit the subscribe button. Do not let this injustice last. And we will see you next time on another episode of Radio Free Mormon. Until then, Kolby and everyone, this is Radio Free Mormon signing off the air.